I was taken aback by my mother-in-law's unexpected words. "I didn't expect you to afford such a place." "Well done, dear. We're more than happy to move in with you." My confusion deepened at her statement. "Excuse me," I interjected, feeling the need to clarify. "With this upgrade, I don't mind holding off on the divorce. Remember, I'm single now, Lucy, 35, working as a doctor at the Women's Health Clinic. My apartment, a comfortable 15-minute drive from work, accommodates not just me but also my husband, William, and his parents. My marriage to William commenced 5 years ago, accompanied by his condition that we live with his parents. Being an only child, I understood his familial obligations. Despite knowing this beforehand, I agreed wholeheartedly. Thus, when we tied the knot, we opted for a larger apartment, embracing life with his parents as part of our domestic arrangement. Initially, when we began our cohabitation, William's parents assured me, "As a doctor, Lucy, you're undoubtedly busy. Leave the household chores to us. Your father-in-law and I will handle everything else while you focus on your work." And true to their word, they diligently managed all cooking, cleaning, and domestic tasks, affording me the luxury of concentrating solely on my professional duties. I assumed William enjoyed the same privileges. However, our dynamic shifted dramatically 6 months later. Abruptly, William resigned from his job. Taken aback, I inquired, "What's prompted this decision? Why quit?" His response was startling. "I believe I've put in my fair share. I need a hiatus before embarking on a fresh start. Besides, even without my income, we won't struggle financially with yours." I countered, "But why such a significant decision without consulting me? You can't guarantee finding another job. What if something happens to me?" His reply was dismissive. "There's no need for pessimism. We have savings to fall back on." Attempting to reason, my mother-in-law intervened. "Now, Lucy, don't be too hard on him. William has toiled diligently thus far. A break is well deserved. Wouldn't you agree? You can compensate for his absence by working a bit harder." Stunned into silence, I pondered the unfairness of her suggestion. My workload was already demanding, and it seemed ludicrous to imply that I should bear the brunt of our financial responsibilities while William enjoyed a respite. After all, I too faced challenges. Upon hearing my retort, my mother-in-law's expression shifted abruptly. With raised eyebrows, she retorted, "Let me remind you, Lucy, you're not the sole one grappling with difficulties here. While you were at work, your father-in-law and I were tending to the household tasks alongside our own jobs without respite. If you insist on such talk, we'll cease our contributions to the household. From now on, you're on your own." Her words struck me dumb. With that declaration, my mother-in-law and William exited the room, heading to the living room to watch TV. Thus began my solitary struggle to juggle both household chores and my job. No one else would lift a finger to help. Takeout meals became a regular occurrence, likely to stave off hunger in their absence of cooking. However, their preferences leaned towards pricey options like sushi, leading to mounting demands for increased funds to cover food expenses. "Lucy, ensure there's enough money for our meals. Are you aiming to starve us?" they plead. Even when I urged restraint, my mother-in-law would counter, "How heartless to suggest scrimping on food when we're confined at home with no other indulgences. You're such a heartless person, neglecting your responsibilities to care for your in-laws." "Perhaps divorce is the answer," he declared. Exasperated, I relented, increasing the funds allotted for food, enabling my in-laws and William to indulge in whatever culinary desires they fancied. During a brief break from work, I dashed to a nearby gas station to pick up a few essentials. Upon reaching the counter for payment, I realized my card was missing and my wallet seemed lighter. Momentary confusion gripped me before I hurried home immediately after work. Bursting into the living room, I was met with the sight of a gleaming new television. "Welcome home, Lucy." "Back so soon," chimed in William, his voice laced with fond innocence. "Isn't it splendid, Lucy?" added my mother-in-law, their faces adorned with sinister smirks. "What's this? How did you manage to afford this?" I questioned, baffled by the sudden splurge. "We had savings, obviously." "Savings," came the casual reply. My mother-in-law seized the opportunity to chime in, her tone dripping with fond gratitude. "Oh, Lucy, we had no idea you were saving so diligently for us. You should have mentioned it sooner. With your dutiful contributions, we can now enjoy even more luxuries. You've finally proven your worth as a daughter-in-law." Spotting my card on the table, I exclaimed, "Wait, did you use my savings? And how did you obtain the PI?" Their response was dismissive. It's simple to deduce. After all, we're family, my mother-in-law asserted with a satisfied grin. Using William's birthday as the PIN shows your affection for him, she added, seemingly pleased with her deduction. I didn't choose the PIN with William in mind. It simply remained unchanged since our marriage, and my feelings towards William are not as they once were, I confessed. Unfazed, both my mother-in-law and William continued their audacious demands. You haven't fulfilled your duties as a daughter-in-law thus far. There's no need to make a fuss over this. Your obligation is clear. Hand over your savings to us quietly. We expect $3,000, no, $4,000 monthly from now on. Don't try to hide your earnings. Ensure we receive our fair share, they insisted. Incensed by their shameless demands, I snapped back. This isn't a joke. Why should my hard-earned money line your pockets? If you desire funds, earn them yourselves. This applies to you both, mother-in-law and father-in-law. Show some decency and consider household finances before attempting to extort from me. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Yet it took no time for my in-laws to retaliate. Such impertinence, daughter-in-law. Is that how you address your mother-in-law? We see no semblance of gratitude from you. What use is a daughter-in-law who only brings money? Your audacity is beyond belief. There's a line you've crossed, my father-in-law seethed. William, unable to contain his frustration, stormed off to his room, though he soon returned with a piece of paper in hand. Here, he thrust it towards me. It was a divorce decree. To my disbelief, not only was William's signature present, but also those of my in-laws as witnesses. File it if you dare, but be prepared to vacate this condo. Living with a stranger is out of the question. Unlike his wife, William is capable, my father-in-law declared sternly. Lucy will overlook your outburst as a momentary lapse. However, any further defiance will lead to your divorce, they jeered, their laughter filling the room. Anger boiled within me, but so did a glimmer of satisfaction. Yet now wasn't the time for retaliation. Suppressing my urge to lash out, I calmly stated, I'll begin moving my belongings and essentials before making my way to my room. My in-laws and William wore expressions of bewilderment. Did they believe I'd beg for forgiveness at the mere mention of divorce? How naive. The divorce papers, complete with signatures, served as a stark reminder of their intentions. Swiftly, I gathered my belongings and declared, I'm leaving. Don't expect me to come to your aid, even in times of trouble. With that, I departed our condo, the divorce papers securely in my possession, seeking refuge in a nearby business hotel for the night. Taking swift action, I canceled the card William had utilized online. Upon checking my balance, I discovered that the once plentiful account, boasting over $10,000, now contained a mere $3,000. Curiosity piqued, I pondered over their extravagant expenditures. However, my savings weren't limited to that account alone. As a precaution, I had sizable reserves in 2 other accounts linked to them. Though stunned to see $7,000 vanish, I deemed it a necessary sacrifice to sever ties with that family. The following day, I wasted no time and headed straight to the city office to submit the divorce papers. With a sense of relief, I watched as they were duly accepted. To assure the finality of the matter, I double-checked my family register certificate, confirming my newfound status as a divorced individual. At last, I had severed ties with that troublesome mother-son duo. While the urge to rejoice surged within me, I remained composed, knowing there were still tasks at hand. My next stop was a real estate agency, where I attended to 2 crucial matters. Firstly, I invested in a home of my own, utilizing the savings I had diligently accrued over the years. Through this process, I came to grasp the true significance of living life on my own terms. The realization dawned upon me that freedom was a precious commodity, one that could easily be compromised. I understood the importance of seizing opportunities promptly and asserting my autonomy without hesitation. I settled into my new single-story house, reveling in its spacious living room, practical kitchen, and a coveted walk-in closet, all mine. Determined to make it truly mine, I spent the day furnishing every nook and cranny, moving in whatever I could manage. The following 3 days were a whirlwind of shopping, acquiring essentials, and indulging in the thrill of creating my sanctuary. While the expense of replacing everything was significant, I deemed it a worthy investment for a fresh start. A few days later, as I sat down to dinner around 8 p.m., the doorbell interrupted my solitude. Curious as to who could be calling at such an hour, I glanced at the intercom screen to find a familiar sight. William, my former mother-in-law, and my former father-in-law. Almost a nostalgic scene. Anticipating their arrival, I approached the door and swung it open. Before I could utter a word, William launched into a tirade. What's the idea, disappearing without a word? It's madness. His outburst prompted his parents to intervene, urging him to calm down. William, take a breath. We agreed to discuss this calmly later, remember? His mother interjected soothingly. Exactly. Look at this place, isn't it fantastic? It's far more spacious and inviting than our cramped condo, his father added, attempting to diffuse the tension. Despite my protests, they barged into my home without hesitation. Hold on, you can't just waltz in here uninvited, I objected, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. Enough. This is as much our place as yours. What's the harm in us visiting? William retorted, brushing aside my objections. With that, they proceeded to explore my home. The furniture isn't to my taste, but I must admit, the layout is quite decent. It might even be more comfortable than our current condo, his father remarked, surveying the space. I never imagined you could afford such a place. Well done, dear. We don't mind moving in with you, my mother-in-law remarked. Excuse me, we're informing you that we've approved this condo. We'll be residing here with you. Perhaps we can overlook your past transgressions. Though your conduct as a daughter-in-law has been superb, we acknowledge your gesture in securing this residence for us. Perhaps William will find it satisfactory. I suppose I can overlook this. If we can reside here, I don't mind remaining married to you, she continued. Excuse me, who's the wife and who's not getting divorced? I interjected, confused by their assertions. The room fell silent as the three exchanged puzzled glances. I'm not married, you know. I'm single, I clarified. Rather than showing astonishment, they seemed unable to comprehend my words. What nonsense are you spouting? Do you think you can escape the consequences of your disrespect? My father-in-law retorted. In response, I thrust the divorce certificate into William's stunned face, causing a visible shift in their demeanor. Lucy, how dare you take such action without consulting us? Do you expect forgiveness? My mother-in-law demanded. Yes, I do. After all, you provided it to me for that purpose, didn't you? I replied calmly. Lucy, how dare you take such action without consulting us? Do you expect forgiveness? She repeated, her tone growing more agitated. Forgiveness. Your names were clearly stated on the divorce notice, weren't they? Including your names implies a decision was made, doesn't it? You were the ones who initiated the divorce papers, weren't you? William explicitly instructed me to file them if possible, so I did. What's the issue? Upon my firm stance, the three fell silent, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Undeterred, I decided to push the matter further. Let's not forget, you're the ones who kicked me out. It appears you've conveniently overlooked the fact that the condo you currently inhabit is registered under my name. Now that we're estranged, I see no reason to uphold that agreement. Hence, I've terminated it. If you fail to vacate within a week, I'll have you forcibly removed from the premises, I declared. Their expressions quickly shifted from anger to shock, their faces draining of color. With determination, I executed my final move. Dialing a number on my phone, I addressed the receiver. Hello. I regret to inform you that there are trespassers in my home. Yes, 3 individuals who have forcefully entered my property. Please dispatch assistance immediately. The address is... I had summoned the police. As their protests rang in my ears, I remained resolute. Don't assume you can escape consequences. One of them exclaimed. What kind of daughter-in-law are you? It's appalling to involve the authorities in family matters. Remember this. Another added, their words a futile attempt to deflect accountability. With their parting remarks echoing in the air, each swiftly departed from my home. As I had repeatedly stated, I was indeed single. Finally, my battle had drawn to a close. I had braced myself for potential retaliation, expecting them to target me at the hospital where I worked. Surprisingly, they never materialized. Stubbornly, they remained in the apartment even after the expiration of the week-long eviction notice. Shortly thereafter, I received a call from the real estate agent. However, I promptly informed them, those individuals are complete strangers to me. Consequently, they were charged with trespassing and promptly dealt with by the authorities. Each was fined $1,000, but unsurprisingly, none could afford to pay. A relative from the countryside stepped in and settled the fines on their behalf. Subsequently, they were forcibly relocated to the countryside. It's likely that by now, they're toiling away on a farm, unpaid, under the watchful eye of their relative. For me, life is unfolding smoothly. Embracing my newfound independence, I've rediscovered the joys of living alone. After years of prioritizing others over myself, every day feels like a fresh start. Moving forward, I'm determined to savor each moment and seize the opportunities that come my way, ensuring that I make the most of this precious life.
I never thought I'd be living alone in this house at 62. Running my fingers along the smooth wooden banister as I climb the stairs each evening, I can't help but think about all the generations of my family who've done the same. This house on Maple Street has been in my family for over a century, and I've called it home for most of my life. My name is Caroline Mitchell, and 20 years ago, my husband Robert left me for his 25-year-old secretary. Our son Tommy was only 12 at the time. I remember the day Robert told me he was leaving as if it were yesterday. He stood in our kitchen, not meeting my eyes, fumbling with his wedding ring. "I'm sorry, Caroline. I never meant for this to happen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I just stood there, gripping the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white. "Does she make you happy, Robert?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded, still not looking at me. "I'll make sure Tommy is taken care of. I'll pay good alimony." And he did keep that promise, I'll give him that. Every month, without fail, the money came in. I saved every penny of it for Tommy's college fund, working extra hours at the marketing firm to cover our daily expenses. The house, thank goodness, was already paid for, my grandmother's final gift to me. This house has been my anchor through everything. Film crews even used it once for a period piece about the Civil War era, saying it perfectly captured the essence of that time. The producer offered to buy it for an obscene amount of money, but I couldn't sell it. This house isn't just walls and windows, it's my heritage, my story. After Robert left, I threw myself into my work and raising Tommy. Dating? It never felt right. My colleagues would try to set me up, but I always declined. "I'm married to my career," I'd joke, but the truth was, I'd lost faith in love. Tommy became my whole world. I made sure he had everything he needed: love, support, guidance. We had our routines: breakfast together every morning, homework at the kitchen table, Sunday movie nights. He graduated with honors and went to a good college, thanks to his father's alimony payments. When Tommy brought home Amy from work last year, I tried to be welcoming. She seemed nice enough, always smiling, complimenting the house, asking about family photos. But something felt off. Maybe it was the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, or how she'd change the subject whenever work came up. Still, I told myself I was just being an overprotective mother. "Mom, we're getting married," Tommy announced over dinner one evening. I remember forcing a smile and hugging them both, pushing down the nagging feeling in my gut. "I'm so happy for you both," I said, and I meant it. Or at least, I wanted to mean it. The wedding was small but lovely. I sat in the front row, watching my boy promise his life to this woman I barely knew. Robert was there too, with his new family, wife number 2, and their teenage twins. We nodded politely to each other but didn't speak. Everything seemed fine at first. They got an apartment across town, both working at the same tech startup. I'd have them over for dinner sometimes, watching how Amy would inspect everything in the house with those calculating eyes of hers. But I never imagined how quickly things would change, or that my peaceful life was about to be turned upside down. I was at work when I got the call from Tommy. His voice was shaking, and I could tell he'd been crying. "Mom, they're laying off half the company. Both Amy and I, we're being let go." My heart sank. I knew how hard it was to lose a job. I'd seen enough colleagues go through it over my years in marketing. "Take a deep breath, honey. Tell me what you need." "We won't be able to make next month's rent," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Our savings, they're pretty much gone." After some quick calculations, I transferred enough money to cover 3 months of rent for their apartment. It wasn't a small amount, but I had some savings, and this was my son. This should give you both time to find new jobs, I told him. The weeks that followed were a mix of hope and disappointment. Tommy landed a new position at a smaller company, but the salary was significantly lower than what he'd been making before. Amy, on the other hand, well, I tried not to judge, but her job search seemed half-hearted at best. When I'd visit them, I'd often find her scrolling through social media instead of job listings. Then came another call from Tommy, just as the 3 months were coming to an end. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but is there any chance we could stay with you for a while? Just until things get better?" I looked around my big empty house, thinking of all the unused rooms. "Of course, honey. You know there's always space for you here." They arrived on a Sunday afternoon, their car packed with belongings. As I helped them carry boxes up to Tommy's old room, I couldn't help but notice Amy's eyes darting around the house, taking everything in with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Caroline," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "your room is just gorgeous. And that home office setup, it would be perfect for our workspace while we're job hunting. Maybe Tommy and I could take that room? It's bigger, and since there are 2 of us." "I'm sorry, Amy," I said firmly but politely, "but that's my personal space. I need my office for work, and I sometimes have to take calls late at night. Tommy's old room is quite spacious, and you'll have plenty of storage in the guest room across the hall." Her face fell, and though she didn't say anything, the look in her eyes sent a chill down my spine. She pursed her lips and turned away, dragging her suitcase up the stairs with more force than necessary. Tommy gave me an apologetic smile. "Thanks for this, Mom. We really appreciate it." Life settled into a new routine, or at least, that's what I tried to tell myself. Every morning, I'd get up at 6, make coffee, and head to work. Tommy would leave around the same time for his new job. And Amy, well, Amy would still be asleep. I tried not to think about it too much during those first few days. She's probably still applying for jobs online, I told myself. But as the days went by, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. Each evening when I returned from work, I'd find her exactly where she'd been that morning, sprawled on my living room couch, phone in hand, surrounded by empty snack bags and coffee mugs. The dishes from her lunch would be piled in the sink, crumbs scattered across my kitchen counter. "How was the job search today?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh, nothing really suitable for my qualifications," she'd reply without looking up from her phone. 2 weeks passed like this. The house, which I'd always kept immaculate, was starting to show signs of neglect. Dust gathered on the furniture, dishes piled up, and laundry overflowed from the hampers. After a particularly long day at work, I decided it was time for a gentle conversation. We were sitting at dinner, a meal I'd prepared after cleaning the kitchen first. I cleared my throat nervously. "Amy, honey," I began, keeping my voice as gentle as possible, "I was thinking, since you're home during the day, maybe you could help out a bit with the housework? Just until you find a job, of course." The change in her expression was instant. Her fork clattered against the plate, and her eyes welled up with tears. "I knew it," she cried, turning to Tommy. "I knew she'd try to turn me into her maid. Just because I'm temporarily unemployed doesn't mean I should be your mother's servant." I sat there, stunned. "Amy, that's not what You'd been looking down on me since day one." She was full on sobbing now. "You think I'm not good enough for your precious son or your precious house." "Amy, please, I didn't mean," but she was already pushing back her chair, running from the table with dramatic flair. Tommy stood up, his face dark with anger. "Mom, I can't believe you'd be so cruel to Amy. She's going through a really tough time right now." After that night, things got even worse. I still did all the cooking and cleaning, while they ordered takeout and left their empty containers wherever they finished eating. Out of habit, or maybe hope, I'd still call them to join me for dinner when I cooked. They'd come down, eat without a word, and leave their dirty dishes on the table. The weeks dragged by, each day feeling longer than the last. The sound of the TV from the living room had become a constant backdrop to my home life, along with the gentle tap-tap of Amy's fingers on her phone screen. I tried to stay out of her way, spending more time at the office than necessary, but the situation weighed heavily on my mind. One morning, during our weekly department meeting, our HR director mentioned they were looking for an office manager. My ears perked up immediately. "What's the starting salary?" I asked as casually as I could. $45,000 to start, she replied. "But there's room for growth. We promote from within whenever possible." I thought about Amy's resume. She had a business degree and had worked in administration before. This could be perfect. I spent my lunch break drafting a careful text to Amy about the position, but then deleted it. This was the kind of news better delivered in person. I left work early that day, my heart light with hope. Maybe this could be the solution to our problems. I found Amy in her usual spot on the couch, scrolling through her phone. A half-eaten bag of chips lay on the coffee table, crumbs scattered across the surface. "Amy," I said, trying to keep my voice bright and encouraging. "I have some good news. There's an opening at my company for an office manager. It's entry-level, but there's real potential for advancement. The starting salary is decent, and I could drive you to work. We could commute together." She shot up from the couch, sending the chip bag flying. "Are you serious right now? An office manager? Do you know what my qualifications are?" I just thought. "You thought what? That I'd be happy to fetch coffee and organize paper clips?" Her voice was rising with each word. "I have a business degree. I was a project coordinator." "Amy, please, I didn't mean." "Oh, I know exactly what you meant." She was practically shrieking now. "You think I'm a freeloader. You think I'm lazy. You can't stand the fact that I'm not working, so you're trying to force me into some degrading position." Just then, Tommy walked through the front door, his timing impossibly bad. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between us. Amy rushed to him, tears streaming down her face. "Your mother just insulted me again. She thinks I'm a freeloader. She's trying to force me to take some menial job as an office manager." I stood up, my hands shaking. "Tommy, that's not true. I was just trying to help. There's an opening at my company, and I thought." "Mom, stop." Tommy's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Why do you always have to do this? Why can't you just leave Amy alone?" "Do what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I'm just trying to help." "Help?" Amy scoffed through her tears. "You're trying to humiliate me." She ran up the stairs, her dramatic sobs echoing through the house. Tommy gave me a look of pure disappointment. "I never thought you could be so difficult to live with, Mom," he said, shaking his head. "You're constantly starting drama. It's like you can't help yourself." He followed his wife upstairs, leaving me standing alone in the living room. I sank back into my chair, my half-finished coffee growing cold in my hands. "Starting drama?" I whispered to myself, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. In all my 62 years, no one had ever accused me of being dramatic. The days turned into weeks, and I learned to keep my mouth shut about the job situation. The mere mention of work would make Amy's eyes narrow dangerously, so I stopped bringing it up altogether. It was easier that way, even if it meant watching her waste her days away on my couch. Things changed when Tommy got his first big commission at work. Suddenly, Amy was going out more often, returning with shopping bags from expensive boutiques and fresh manicures that probably cost more than our weekly grocery bill. Not once did she think to pick up laundry detergent or paper towels. Those mundane household items remained my responsibility. I kept hoping that with Tommy's improved income, they'd start looking for their own place. Each morning, I'd check the local rental listings on my phone, imagining them finding a nice apartment across town. But they seemed perfectly content to stay put, making themselves more and more at home in my house. One evening, I came home to find Amy excitedly chatting on her phone in my living room. "Oh my God, yes, the house is absolutely perfect for a party," she was saying. "You should see the vintage chandelier in the dining room. It'll look amazing in photos." I set down my briefcase, my stomach already nodding. "What party?" She hung up and turned to Tommy, who had just walked in. "Babe, we should definitely have our anniversary party here. Can you believe it's been almost 2 years? Where exactly are you planning to have this party?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Here, of course." Amy gestured around my living room. "This house is gorgeous, Caroline. All our friends will love it. I'm thinking we could set up the bar in the foyer, and maybe move some furniture around in the living room to create a dance floor." "Shouldn't you have asked me first?" I interrupted, trying to keep my voice level. But Amy was already scrolling through her phone. "We should invite the Hendersons, and maybe that new couple from your office, Tommy. Oh, and we absolutely need to call that catering company we used for New Year's." I turned to Tommy, hoping he'd say something, but he was nodding along with his wife's plans, a smile on his face. Later that evening, I cornered Tommy in the kitchen. "Mom, I know what you're going to say," he started, "but it would mean so much to Amy. She's been feeling down lately, and this would really lift her spirits." "This is my house, Tommy. You can't just decide to throw a party here without asking me first." "Please, Mom?" He gave me that look, the same one he used to give me when he wanted extra dessert as a child. "I promise we'll take care of everything. I'll even hire a cleaning service to come in afterward. You won't have to lift a finger." I stood there, looking at my son, this man who used to be the considerate boy I raised, and felt my resolve crumbling. "Fine," I sighed, already knowing I'd regret this decision. "But I want everything back in its proper place afterward." "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." He hugged me quickly and bounded up the stairs to tell Amy the good news. The week leading up to the party was a whirlwind of activity, none of which I was included in. Amy took over my house like a general, planning a military campaign. Delivery trucks came and went, bringing everything from fancy tablecloths to crystal champagne flutes. She rearranged my furniture without asking, pushing my favorite reading chair into a corner to make room for a makeshift dance floor. I kept my distance, retreating to my office whenever possible. Still, I couldn't help but overhear her endless phone conversations about appetizer selections and wine choices. My grandmother's antique vase was moved to make room for elaborate flower arrangements, and my family photos were taken down to be replaced with string lights and paper lanterns. Friday afternoon, I left work early. I had even bought a new dress for the occasion, nothing too fancy, just a simple navy blue cocktail dress that I thought would be appropriate. As I pulled into my driveway, I could see cars already lining the street. I took a deep breath and walked up to my own front door. Inside, the house was barely recognizable. The furniture had been pushed against the walls, creating an open space in the center where people were already dancing. The air was thick with the smell of catering food and expensive perfume. Amy spotted me from across the room. She was wearing a short silver dress that caught the light from the newly installed party lights, her hair and makeup professionally done. She excused herself from the group she was talking to and walked over to me, her face fixed in an artificial smile. "Caroline," she said, her voice sickly sweet but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I thought you'd be gone by now." I blinked in confusion. "Gone? Why would I be gone?" "Oh." She tilted her head, her smile never wavering. "I guess I forgot to mention, this party is really just for our friends. You know, young people? I assumed you'd make other arrangements for the evening. Maybe get a hotel room?" I stood there, stunned, as a few of her friends nearby giggled into their champagne glasses. "This is my house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, and you've been so generous letting us use it," Amy said, patting my arm condescendingly. "But you have to understand, having someone's mom at an anniversary party is kind of a buzzkill." I looked past her to Tommy, who was standing nearby, watching this exchange. Surely he wouldn't allow this. Surely he would step in and defend me. "Mom," he said, walking over. "Amy's right. This is really more of a young people's party. It might be better if you weren't here." In that moment, something inside me, something that had been stretching thinner and thinner over the past months, finally snapped. Without a word, I turned and walked up the stairs. Behind me, I could hear Amy's smug voice. See? I knew she'd be reasonable about this. She's probably just gone to pack an overnight bag. I entered Tommy's old room, their room now, and pulled their suitcases from under the bed. My hands were steady as I began emptying drawers, folding nothing, just throwing their clothes into the bags. Designer dresses, expensive suits, all the things they'd bought with Tommy's new salary, into the suitcases they went. I stripped the bed, wrapped their toiletries in a towel, and added those too. The music thumped below as I dragged the heavy suitcases down the stairs, one in each hand. The sound of them bumping against each step drew everyone's attention. The crowd parted as I entered the living room, faces turning from their conversations to watch the scene unfold. "Mom?" Tommy's voice cracked. "What are you doing?" I dropped the suitcases in the middle of the makeshift dance floor. "You're leaving, now. The party's over." Amy's face contorted with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed. "You can't do this." "This is my house," I said, my voice deadly calm. "You have exactly 5 minutes to leave before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." "Mom, come on," Tommy laughed nervously. "You're joking, right?" I pulled out my phone. 4 minutes. The guests began shuffling toward the door, muttering among themselves. Some were already calling Ubers. "You deranged old fool." Amy stepped toward me, her finger pointed at my face. I moved so quickly it surprised even me, closing the distance between us until we were nose to nose. "Call me one more name," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "and I'll show you exactly how much fight this old fool has left in her. Try me." The color drained from Amy's face. She stumbled backward, grabbing the nearest suitcase. Tommy stood frozen for a moment before reaching for the second bag. "Mom," he started. "Get out." They walked to the door, Amy still muttering curses under her breath. Tommy looked back once, but I had already turned away, beginning to take down the tacky decorations they'd hung on my walls. After they left, I surveyed the abandoned party scene, tables loaded with untouched food, half-empty champagne glasses scattered everywhere, my grandmother's vase thankfully still intact. I began boxing up the catering trays. The local homeless shelter was still open, at least some good could come from all this food. The weeks after the party passed quietly. Too quietly, perhaps. But after months of chaos, the silence in my house felt like a blessing. I put everything back in its proper place, my reading chair returned to its spot by the window, my family photos back on the walls, my grandmother's vase centerpiece on the dining room table. News travels fast in small towns. Sarah, my friend who works in real estate, told me Tommy and Amy had rented a 2-bedroom apartment in the new complex across town. "Funny thing," she said over coffee one morning, "Janet from the leasing office is an old friend. Says they almost didn't pass the credit check, but Tommy's new salary just barely got them approved." I sipped my coffee and said nothing. More stories trickled in. Martha, whose niece lives in the same building, reported that the property manager had already given them 2 warnings about the state of their apartment during routine inspections. "The place is a mess," Martha confided, shaking her head. "Garbage piling up, dishes in the sink for days." Sound familiar? I just nodded, remembering my own kitchen during their stay. Then came word of the arguments. They weren't exactly subtle about it. The neighbors could hear them through the walls, Amy screaming about Tommy's pathetic salary, how she was sick of living in a dump, how none of her friends had to live like this. Tommy firing back about her refusing to work, to cook, to clean, to do anything at all really. "They say she throws things sometimes," my friend Linda whispered during our weekly lunch. "Tommy was seen sleeping in his car one night last week." Each story made my heart ache a little. Not for Amy, I was done wasting sympathy on her. But for Tommy, he was still my son, despite everything. Sometimes I pick up the phone, my finger hovering over his number, but I always put it down again. This is his lesson to learn, his path to walk. The house feels different now. Peaceful, yes, but also waiting. Like it knows this isn't the end of the story. Some nights, as I sit in my reading chair with a cup of tea, I look at the photos on the wall: Tommy's graduation, his first baseball game, the two of us at the beach when he was 10. I remember the little boy who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting that mom could fix anything. But I can't fix this for him. He needs to see it for himself, to understand what he's become and find his way back to being the person I raised him to be. Until then, I'll be here in our family home, keeping his room ready, just in case. Not for Amy, that bridge is well and truly burned. But for my son, when he's ready to apologize, to talk, to rebuild. In the meantime, I'm reclaiming my life. I joined a book club, started taking painting classes on weekends, and even adopted a cat from the local shelter. His name is Oliver, and he's excellent company. He sits with me in the evenings, purring contentedly as I read, neither of us feeling the need to fill the silence with empty words. Life goes on, as it always does. And when Tommy's ready, he'll know where to find me. My earliest memories are filled with the warmth of my father's smile and the comfort of our small rented apartment. I'm Carla, and until I was 13, my life was nothing but ordinary, in the best possible way. My dad, James, was the kind of father who made everything an adventure. Even though we lived in a modest apartment, he turned our tiny balcony into a fairy garden and our living room into a fort during rainy weekends. Mom, Sarah, was different, more reserved, always dreaming of a bigger house and a grander life. But back then, their differences seemed to balance each other out perfectly. "Carla, sweetie, would you like to spend the weekend at Grandpa's?" Mom would often ask, and I'd jump at the chance. Not because I didn't want to be home, but because Grandpa Richard's house was like a second home to me. It was this beautiful two-story Victorian with creaking wooden floors and endless corners to explore. "Your mother needs her alone time with your father," Grandpa would explain with a knowing smile when I'd arrive at his doorstep. "And I need my time with my favorite granddaughter." I was a perceptive child, more than the adults around me realized. I understood that Mom sometimes needed space, that she and Dad had their own relationship to nurture. It didn't hurt me, if anything, it made me feel mature. Plus, those weekends with Grandpa were precious. He'd tell me stories about Dad's childhood, teach me about managing money, he was a retired bank manager, and make the best pancakes in the world. "You know, Carla," he told me once while we were having breakfast on his porch, "your mother dreams of a house like this. But you know what's more important than a big house? A home filled with love." I nodded, understanding even at that young age. Our apartment might have been small, but it was filled with love. Dad would come home from his job at the insurance company, swing me around in his arms, and pepper Mom with kisses until she laughed despite herself. Those moments made our tiny space feel infinite. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. I was 13 when Dad started losing weight rapidly. At first, he joked about it, saying he was finally getting in shape, but his eyes told a different story. The doctor's visits became more frequent, and Mom's face grew increasingly worried. "It's just a phase," Dad would say, ruffling my hair weakly. "I'll be back to my old self in no time." But he wasn't. The disease, aggressive pancreatic cancer, consumed him like a wildfire. Within months, my strong, vibrant father became a shadow of himself. I watched helplessly as Mom tried to hold everything together, but I could see her crumbling inside. The last conversation I had with Dad is forever etched in my memory. He was lying in his hospital bed, his hand barely strong enough to hold mine. "Take care of your mom for me, princess," he whispered. "And let Grandpa guide you. He's wiser than all of us combined." The year after Dad's death felt like living in a fog. Mom spiraled into such deep depression that she could barely look at me. I guess I reminded her too much of him. Thank goodness for Grandpa Richard. He became my rock, my safe harbor in the storm that our lives had become. Living in Grandpa's house wasn't just a temporary solution anymore, it became my new normal. Every morning, I'd wake up in what used to be Dad's old room, surrounded by his childhood photos and trophies. Grandpa made sure I kept up with school, helped me with homework, and tried his best to fill the void both my parents had left, one through death, the other through grief. Mom would call occasionally, but her voice always seemed distant, detached. Her visits were even rarer, quick stops where she'd barely meet my eyes, before rushing off again. I learned to stop expecting more. Then, exactly 1 year and 2 months after Dad's death, everything changed. Mom showed up at Grandpa's door one sunny Saturday morning, and I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the grieving widow in black, replaced by someone wearing a bright yellow dress and sporting a new haircut. Her face was glowing with unhappiness. "Carla, sweetie, pack your things. You're coming home," she announced, bouncing on her heels like a teenager. I looked at Grandpa, confused. He seemed just as surprised as I was. The drive back to our apartment was filled with Mom's cheerful chatter about everything and nothing. It was like sitting next to a stranger who happened to look like my mother. But the real shock came when we walked through our apartment door. There, in our small living room, stood a tall man and a girl who looked about 3 years younger than me. They both smiled awkwardly as Mom practically danced to their side. "Carla, meet Robert and his daughter Emma. Robert is my fiancé, and Emma will be your new sister. We're getting married soon," Mom beamed, clutching Robert's arm. The room started spinning. "What? When did this happen?" "Oh, we've been dating for a while now," Mom waved her hand dismissively. "I didn't tell anyone about our relationship. You know how people can get jealous and judgmental. It was better this way." I stumbled to my old room, barely registering that it had been redecorated. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and called Grandpa. He answered on the first ring. "Mom has a fiancé," I whispered into the phone. "She's getting married and didn't tell anyone. There's a man here, and his daughter." Grandpa arrived within 20 minutes. I could hear the conversation from my room as he confronted Mom. "Sarah, how could you do this without telling anyone? Without telling your own daughter?" "Dad, I'm happy for the first time in forever." Mom's voice was defensive. "I've decided to start fresh, to live again. James would want that. He wouldn't want me to waste away in depression forever." There was a long pause before Grandpa spoke again, his voice heavy with resignation. "I hope you'll be happy, Sarah. Just, don't forget you have a daughter who needs you too." The 3 months before the wedding were like living in some twisted alternate reality. Our small apartment felt even more cramped with 4 people instead of 2, but that wasn't the worst part. What really got to me was watching Emma, my soon-to-be stepsister, wrap my mother around her finger. "Mom, can you help me with my hair?" Emma would say, and my mother would drop everything, including our conversation, to assist her. The way she said "Mom" made my skin crawl, especially since she'd only known my mother for a few months. Mom seemed blind to everything except Emma. When Emma mentioned she loved ballet, Mom immediately signed her up for private lessons, something I'd begged for years ago but was told we couldn't afford. When Emma complained about her old phone being too slow, Mom bought her the latest iPhone model. When Emma wanted to redecorate her side of the bedroom we now shared, Mom took her shopping and spent hundreds of dollars on new bedding, curtains, and decorations. "Your sister needs to feel welcome here," Mom would say whenever I tried to point out the disparity in treatment. "Stepsister," I'd correct her. "And I need to feel welcome too." She'd just shake her head and walk away. The wedding day itself was a modest affair at a local venue, but Mom glowed with happiness. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, watching as she fussed over Emma's hair and makeup, barely sparing me a glance. Throughout the ceremony and reception, Mom kept Emma close, holding her hand, introducing her to everyone as "my beautiful daughter." I might as well have been a waitress for all the attention I received. Grandpa gave them a check for $5,000 as a wedding gift, a generous amount by any standard. But I overheard Mom's reaction when she cornered him by the restrooms. "Really, Dad? A check?" she hissed, her face flushed from champagne and anger. "I was counting on you giving us your house. We're a proper family now, we need the space. That apartment is too small for 4 people." Grandpa remained calm, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Sarah, you're rushing everything. First the sudden engagement, now this? That house isn't just property to be handed over on a whim. Besides, it's where Carla spends half her time now. Oh, so that's it? You're playing favorites now? No, I'm being practical. And maybe you should be too. I slipped away before they could notice me, but the conversation haunted me. My mother had changed so much that I barely recognized her anymore. She'd created this new perfect family in her mind, with Emma as the star child and Robert as the ideal husband. There didn't seem to be any room left for me. So I did what any unwanted person would do. I spent more and more time at Grandpa's house. At least there, I didn't have to pretend to be happy about being replaced. For years have passed since that moment, and I was about to graduate from high school. Living in that apartment had become a masterclass in avoiding conflict. I'd learned to be quiet, to take up as little space as possible, to spend most of my time either in my room or at Grandpa's. One evening, during our weekly family dinner, another exercise in pretending we were one big happy family, I decided to share my plans for the future. I've been accepted to State University, I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. I want to study finance and business management. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom put down her fork, exchanged a look with Robert, and cleared her throat. Actually, Carla, I think it would be better if you started working after graduation. College isn't necessary for everyone. I stared at her, bewildered. What are you talking about? Dad set up a college fund for me before he died. He always wanted me to get higher education. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. About that fund, Robert and I have been talking, and we think it would be better to save that money for Emma's education. She's incredibly talented, you know. Top of her class and everything. She'll need a good university education to reach her full potential. Robert nodded sagely. Emma has shown remarkable aptitude in her studies. It would be the right thing to do, Carla. You could work for a few years, save up, and then go to college if you still want to. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The college fund, the last gift my father had arranged for me, they wanted to take that too? That money is mine, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Dad left it specifically for MY education. You can't just give it to Emma. Don't be selfish, Carla. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Emma is your sister. Stepsister. I stood up so quickly, my chair fell backward. And that money is the last thing I have from Dad. You've given her everything else, my room, your attention, your love. But you can't have this. I won't let you take it. How dare you? Mom was crying now, but I could see the manipulation in her tears. After everything we've done for you. Emma needs. Emma needs? What about what I need? What about what Dad wanted for me? The argument ended with doors slamming and tears, mostly Mom's, as she wailed about my selfishness. After that night, the apartment became even more hostile. No one spoke to me unless absolutely necessary. Emma would smirk whenever she passed me in the hallway, and Robert wouldn't even look in my direction. When graduation day came, I wasn't surprised to find only Grandpa in the audience. He cheered loud enough for 4 people when they called my name, and his proud smile meant more to me than anything my new family could have offered. That evening, I packed everything I owned into 3 cardboard boxes and my old suitcase. Grandpa helped me load them into his car. Your room is always ready for you, sweetheart, he said as we drove away from the apartment. Always has been, always will be. I didn't look back as we left. There was nothing there for me anymore. College life became my escape. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make my father and Grandpa proud. The business and finance courses fascinated me, and I found myself excelling in ways that would have made Dad smile. Every evening, I'd call Grandpa to share what I'd learned. Tell me again about derivatives, he'd say, even though he knew more about finance than my professors. I love hearing you explain it. But as my college years progressed, I noticed changes in Grandpa's voice during our calls. He got tired more easily, and his usual sharp wit sometimes seemed dulled. During my visits home, I caught him wincing when he stood up or rubbing his chest when he thought I wasn't looking. "It's just age catching up with me," he'd say whenever I asked about his health. "Nothing to worry about, sweetheart." But I did worry. I started calling him twice a day instead of once, and I'd drive home every weekend I could, not just on holidays. We'd sit in his kitchen, drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing, just like we used to. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with such intense love that it made my throat tight. It was the middle of my final semester when Mom called. I almost didn't answer. It was the first time she'd called in 4 years. But something made me pick up. "Grandpa died last night," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "The funeral is on Thursday at 2 p.m. Hartford Funeral Home." The phone slipped from my hand. I don't remember much of what happened next, just that my roommate found me curled up on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Thursday came too quickly, and not quickly enough. The funeral home was exactly the kind of place Grandpa would have chosen, understated but elegant, with large windows letting in natural light. I arrived early, my black dress feeling too tight, my skin too sensitive, everything wrong, because Grandpa wasn't there to make it right. I expected to see Mom and her family, but they weren't there. Instead, Mr. Harrison, Grandpa's friend from his banking days, was organizing everything. "They're running a bit late," he said when I asked. "Your mother called to say they'd be delayed." The service was beautiful, filled with people from Grandpa's life sharing stories about his kindness, his integrity, his humor. I sat in the front row, alone with my grief, until halfway through the service when I heard the back door open. Mom swept in with Robert and Emma, all in perfectly coordinated black outfits. They took seats in the far back, and Mom didn't even glance in my direction. Her face was set in a mask of appropriate grief, but her eyes were already darting around the room, assessing, calculating. I turned back to face the front, my tears now burning with both grief and anger. Even here, even now, she couldn't acknowledge me. Couldn't put aside her pettiness for one day to mourn her own father. After the funeral service, I drove to Grandpa's house, my home for the past 4 years, only to stop short at the sight that greeted me. There, scattered across the front lawn like worthless debris, were garbage bags filled with my belongings. My clothes, my books, my photo albums, everything from my room had been unceremoniously thrown out. Some bags had split open, spilling my life across the grass. With trembling hands, I tried my key in the front door. It wouldn't turn. The lock had been changed. I was still standing there, key uselessly in hand, when the door swung open. Mom stood in the doorway, wearing the same black dress from the funeral, but now with an expression of triumph rather than grief. "Oh good, you're here to collect your things," she said, as if she was doing me a favor. "This is my house now. Dad's finally gone, and as his only child, I'm the rightful heir. I've already had the locks changed, we're moving in tonight." I stared at her, unable to process the cruelty of it all. "You couldn't even wait until after the funeral?" "These are my things, my home." "No, this is my home now," she cut me off sharply. "And you better take your stuff quickly, or it's going in the dumpster. I need to clear the space for Emma's things." She smiled coldly. "She's getting your old room, by the way. She's always wanted a bigger bedroom." I felt numb as I gathered my belongings, stuffing everything back into the torn bags, trying to collect the scattered photos of Dad and Grandpa from where they'd fallen in the grass. My mother stood in the doorway the entire time, watching me like a security guard, making sure I didn't try to steal anything. The drive back to my college dorm was a blur of tears and disbelief. My roommate helped me carry everything up, not asking questions when she saw my state. A week later, I received a call from a law firm. "Miss Johnson? This is Mr. Anderson from Anderson and Partners Law Firm. I'm your grandfather's notary. We need you to come in for the reading of his will. Would Thursday at 10 a.m. work for you?" I agreed, though I couldn't see the point. Mom had made it clear she was the heir to everything. When I arrived at the notary's office that Thursday, Mom, Robert, and Emma were already there, seated like royalty in the leather chairs. Emma was examining her manicure, while Robert scrolled through his phone. Mom's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked loudly enough for everyone in the office to hear. "You're clearly not needed for this. We're handling family business." Mr. Anderson adjusted his glasses and began reading from the document in front of him. "I, Richard James Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament." He started with the formal language, but I saw Mom already smiling triumphantly. That smile froze when Mr. Anderson continued, "To my beloved granddaughter, Carla Johnson, I leave my house at 1542 Oak Street, along with all its contents, and my entire savings account containing $475,000. The room went deadly silent for a moment. Then Mom's voice shattered it. "What? This can't be right." She snatched the document from Mr. Anderson's hands, her eyes scanning frantically. "Where's my part? I'm his daughter." Mr. Anderson calmly retrieved the will. "Mrs. Waters, your father's wishes are quite clear. He leaves everything to Miss Carla Johnson. There is no provision for you in the will." "This is impossible." Mom's face had turned scarlet. "She manipulated him. She poisoned him against me. I'll sue. I'll contest this will." "The will is ironclad," Mr. Anderson stated firmly. "Your father had it properly witnessed and notarized 6 months ago. He was of completely sound mind, as attested by his doctor. Any attempt to contest it would be futile and expensive." Mom's strategy suddenly shifted. The rage in her eyes transformed into tears as she turned to me. "Carla, sweetie, please," she pleaded, her voice honey-sweet now. "We've already given up our apartment. We moved everything out yesterday. We have nowhere to go. You can't just throw us out on the street. We're family." I stood up, holding the folder Mr. Anderson had just handed me. Inside were the deed to the house, ownership transfer documents, and all the legal paperwork confirming my ownership of the property. "Family?" I asked quietly. "Like how you threw my belongings onto the lawn before Grandpa was even in his grave? Like how you tried to steal my college fund? Like how you've treated me for the past 4 years? That was different. We were. This is your problem, not mine." I cut her off, turning to leave. "I suggest you start looking for a new apartment." I drove straight to Grandpa's house, my house now, but I couldn't get in. I pulled out my phone and called a locksmith, explaining the situation. When he arrived, I showed him my freshly notarized ownership documents. "I'm the legal owner of this house," I explained, showing him the paperwork. "I need you to open these locks and then change them to new ones. I want to be the only one with the keys." As the locksmith worked, I gathered up everything that belonged to Mom, Robert, and Emma, all the clothes they'd already unpacked, their toiletries from the bathrooms, Emma's posters she'd already stuck to my old bedroom wall. I loaded it all into garbage bags, just as they'd done with my things. When the locksmith finished and handed me the new keys, I dragged all their bags onto the front porch and arranged them neatly. The symmetry of the situation wasn't lost on me. Their belongings now sat where mine had been just days ago. As the sun began to set, I heard the familiar sound of Mom's car pulling into the driveway. I watched through the living room window, Grandpa's favorite spot to read his morning paper, as their reactions played out exactly as I'd expected. "What is this?" Mom's shriek could be heard clearly through the closed windows. "Our things? All our things are outside." I opened the door, but stood firmly in the doorway as they approached. Mom's face was red with fury, Robert looked like he'd swallowed something sour, and Emma was already crying theatrical tears. "How dare you?" Mom stormed up the porch steps. "We live here now. You can't do this to us." "Actually, I can. This is my house now, legally and rightfully. You need to take your belongings and leave." "We have nowhere to go," Emma wailed. "You should have thought about that before giving up your apartment," I replied coolly. "Not my problem." Mom tried to push past me into the house, but I stood my ground. "Move, Carla. This is ridiculous. This is my father's house." "No, it's my house now. And if you don't leave immediately with your things, I'm calling the police to report you for trespassing. After that, all these bags go straight to the dumpster." I pulled out my phone. "Your choice, Mom. Just like you gave me a choice about my things a few days ago, remember?" The next few minutes were filled with cursing and threats as they gathered their bags. Mom alternated between crying and screaming about how unfair it all was, while Emma kept saying I'd regret this. Robert muttered under his breath about contesting the will. As they loaded the last bag into their car, Mom turned to me one final time. "You're no daughter of mine. Your father would be ashamed of you." I smiled sadly. "No, Mom. Dad would be proud that I finally stood up for myself. Goodbye." I watched them drive away, their car disappearing around the corner. That was 6 months ago. I'm in my final semester now, about to graduate with honors. The house is being rented to a lovely young family. Their monthly rent payments are helping me build my savings, just as Grandpa would have wanted. I found his letter in the study safe that first night, after everyone left. "My dearest Carla," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've already dealt with your mother's reaction to my will. I'm sorry I had to put you through that, but I knew Sarah too well. I knew what she would try to do. You have your father's integrity and my business sense, use them both wisely. The house is yours to do with as you please. Just promise me you'll keep the family photos in the attic. Some memories are worth keeping, even the painful ones." I kept that promise, along with the others I made to both him and Dad. I'm focusing on my future now, letting go of the past, but keeping the lessons it taught me. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to, sometimes it's who believes in you, who protects you, who helps you grow. Mom, Robert, and Emma still live somewhere in the city. I hear they found a new apartment eventually. They've tried to contact me a few times, usually when they need something, but I don't respond. Some chapters of our lives are better left closed. While most of my friends' families revolved around their parents, in our house, my grandmother was the one who really called the shots. And honestly, she had every right to. She'd built our family's exclusive tableware store from nothing, turning it into a thriving business that made her quite wealthy. "Your grandmother has always had an eye for beautiful things," my father would say whenever customers praised our store's collection. He and my mother ran the day-to-day operations now, but everyone knew who the real owner was. My grandmother had only stepped back to enjoy her retirement, not to give up control. My younger brother Tommy was being groomed as the heir apparent from the moment he could walk. "He needs to learn everything about the business," my mother would say, while practically ignoring my existence. It didn't seem to matter that I was getting straight A's, while Tommy could barely be bothered to crack open a book. "Who needs to be smart to run a store?" Tommy would say, sprawled on the couch playing video games instead of doing his homework. "I just need to know how to count money." Our parents would laugh at these comments like they were adorable, while I sat at the dining table working on my advanced math problems. But I had my secret weapon, Grandma. Every weekend, I'd go to her house, and we'd play what she called business games. She taught me everything about running a successful store, from inventory management to customer service, from profit margins to negotiating with suppliers. "Now, Rachel," she'd say, setting up our pretend store on her living room table, "if a customer wants to buy this crystal wine set for $500, but our cost was $200, what's our profit margin?" Her eyes would twinkle as I quickly calculated the numbers. "That's a 60% margin, Grandma," I'd answer excitedly. "But we should consider our overhead costs too, right?" She'd beam at me, pulling another gift from her seemingly endless supply. "That's my girl. You understand business better than most adults I know." These sessions with Grandma weren't just fun, they sparked something in me. While my parents were busy preparing Tommy to inherit the store, I was making my own plans. I decided I would go to college and study business properly. When I turned 14, my life changed dramatically. I still remember that evening as if it was yesterday. My parents called me into the living room after dinner, and my father's stern face told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "Rachel," he said, looking at me with cold eyes, "your mother and I have been talking. It's time for you to stop being lazy and help out with the family business. Starting tomorrow, you'll work at the store after school." The next day, I started my new job at our family store. Every day after school, while my brother Tommy went home to play video games and mess around, I was mopping floors, dusting shelves, arranging expensive china, and doing whatever else needed to be done. I worked hard, determined to prove myself. Sometimes I'd stay late into the evening, making sure every crystal glass sparkled and every display was perfect. After 3 months of working alongside the adult employees, I started noticing something that bothered me more and more. Every Friday, all the employees would receive their paychecks. They'd discuss weekend plans and what they were going to do with their earnings. Meanwhile, I worked just as hard, sometimes harder, but received nothing. One evening, when the store was empty except for my parents counting the day's earnings at the register, I gathered my courage and approached them. "Mom, Dad," I started nervously, "I've been thinking. I'm doing the same work as the other employees. Actually, I'm doing multiple jobs. Shouldn't I be getting paid too?" The look they exchanged made my blood run cold. My father's face hardened, and my mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "Paid?" my father scoffed. "Do you have any idea how much we spend on you? Food, clothes, that roof over your head, you think all that's free?" "But that's different," I argued. "Parents are supposed to." "Don't you dare tell us what parents are supposed to do," my mother snapped. "Consider your work here as payment for everything we provide for you." Many children would be grateful for such an arrangement. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but fought to hold them back. That's when my mother stepped closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper that I'll never forget. "And let me make something very clear," she hissed. "Don't even think about running to your grandmother with this. This is our business to run as we see fit. If I find out you've complained to her, you'll regret it. Understood?" For 2 long years, I worked without pay, watching other employees receive their weekly paychecks while I got nothing but tired feet and calloused hands. But as my 16th birthday approached, I made a decision that would change everything. The day after my birthday, I walked into my parents' office with my head held high. "I quit," I announced firmly. My father's head snapped up from his paperwork. "What did you just say?" "I'm not working here anymore," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I need my own money, and since you won't pay me, I found a job at the Coffee Corner Cafe. They're hiring part-time after school." My parents exchanged alarmed looks. My mother recovered first, her eyes narrowing calculatingly. "Fine," she said slowly, "but on one condition, you tell your grandmother you're still working here. She doesn't need to know about this arrangement." As I walked out of that office, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time since I turned 14, I was taking control of my own life, and it felt amazing. My first day at Coffee Corner marked the beginning of my new life. The manager, Sarah, was nothing like my parents. She was kind, patient, and actually appreciated hard work. Every Friday, I'd get my paycheck, and that feeling was indescribable. For the first time in my life, I had money that was truly mine. I loved everything about my new job, the smell of fresh coffee, the regular customers who learned my name, and especially my coworkers who treated me like an equal, not a servant. The best part? I could finally buy things for myself without having to beg my parents. My first paycheck went toward a new phone, nothing fancy, but it was mine. The second one bought me some new clothes. But what I enjoyed most was being able to buy small gifts for Grandma. One week, it would be her favorite chocolates, another week, a beautiful scarf I spotted at the mall. "Oh, sweetheart, you shouldn't spend your store wages on me," she'd say, her eyes twinkling as she admired whatever small present I'd brought. Those moments were the hardest, lying to Grandma about still working at the store. She'd ask how things were going there, and I'd make up stories about rearranging displays or helping customers. "You have such a good eye for presentation," she'd beam proudly. "Just like I did at your age." The guilt would eat at me, but I kept reminding myself that this lie was protecting my newfound freedom. As senior year progressed, my grades stayed perfect. My teachers started talking about top universities: Harvard, Yale, Stanford. "With your academic record, Rachel, you could go anywhere," my guidance counselor said during one of our meetings. But I knew better. My parents wouldn't spend a dime on my education, they'd made that clear enough over the years. And while Grandma would probably help if I asked, I couldn't bring myself to do it. After years of being dependent on family, I wanted to stand on my own feet. So I focused my research on local options, and discovered that our city college had an excellent business program. Better yet, they offered full scholarships to top students. I spent weeks perfecting my application, and when the acceptance letter came with the scholarship offer, I felt like I'd won the lottery. The morning before graduation, Grandma visited me with a special gift, a stunning new laptop. "For my future businesswoman," she'd said with a warm smile, hugging me tight. "I know you'll do great things with it." That evening at the graduation dinner, with just my parents and brother present, I decided it was time to share my news. "I've enrolled in City College's business program," I announced, trying to keep my voice casual. "Full scholarship." The silence following my announcement was broken by my father's calculating smile. "Well, that's certainly convenient," he said, exchanging a look with my mother. "At least we won't have to worry about tuition." "Yes, you've solved that problem quite nicely," my mother added, wiping her mouth with a napkin. Which brings us to our next point. Now that you're an adult and finished with high school, we need to discuss your living arrangements. "What do you mean?" I asked, fork frozen halfway to my mouth. "Rent," my father said flatly. "Starting today, you'll need to pay rent to continue living here." I laughed, thinking it was some kind of bizarre joke. But their faces remained serious, and my laughter died in my throat. "You can't be serious," I said, looking between them. "I'm your daughter." "You're an adult now," my mother countered. "We're no longer legally obligated to support you. This house belongs to us, and if you want to continue living here, you'll need to pay your fair share." My mind was spinning. "What about Tommy?" I asked, glancing at my brother who was unusually quiet. "Will he have to pay rent when he turns 18 too?" The way my parents avoided my eyes told me everything I needed to know. Of course Tommy wouldn't have to pay rent. Perfect, precious Tommy would never be treated this way. "That's different," my father muttered, not even bothering to explain how. "This is insane," I said, pushing back from the table. "I'm your child. I have a right to live in my own home." "This isn't your home," my mother snapped, her mask of civility finally cracking. "This is our house, and if you won't pay rent, you need to leave. Tonight." "Tonight?" I echoed in disbelief. "You're throwing me out on graduation night?" "You have an hour to pack your things," my father said, returning to his dinner as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb on my life. I ran upstairs in a daze, tears blurring my vision as I threw clothes and necessities into my bags. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip them closed. College wouldn't start for months. What was I supposed to do until then? My first thought was Grandma. She would help me, I knew she would. But when I called her number, it went straight to voicemail. Then I remembered she'd left for her annual trip to Hawaii just yesterday. She'd be gone for at least 3 weeks. I couldn't ruin her vacation with this drama. She deserved to enjoy her time off without having to deal with my parents' cruelty. Wiping my tears, I scrolled through my phone contacts until I found Jenny's number. We'd been friends since middle school, and her family had always been kind to me. 20 minutes later, I was loading my bags into Jenny's car, leaving behind the only home I'd ever known. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of my parents watching from the window, their faces expressionless. In that moment, I finally accepted what I'd always known deep down: they had never really loved me at all. Life fell into a new routine during those 3 weeks at Jenny's house. Wake up on her fold-out couch before dawn, quietly get ready so I wouldn't disturb her family, work my shifts at the cafe, save every penny I could. Sarah, my manager, was a godsend during this time. She understood my situation and increased my hours without me even having to ask. Working helped keep my mind off things. I threw myself into every task, whether it was crafting perfect lattes or scrubbing down the equipment at closing time. "You're going to work yourself into the ground," Jenny would say when I'd come home exhausted after another double shift. But what else could I do? I needed to save as much as possible before college started, and staying busy meant less time to think about my parents' betrayal. I avoided them completely during this time. They never called or texted, and I was fine with that. What could they possibly say to justify throwing their daughter out on graduation night? Tommy sent me one message asking where I was, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. When Grandma finally returned from Hawaii after those long 3 weeks, I felt a surge of hope so strong it almost made me dizzy. I'd waited patiently, forcing myself not to contact her during her vacation. She deserved to enjoy her time away without getting dragged into family drama. But now, finally, I could tell her everything. With trembling fingers, I typed out a message. "Grandma, I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet?" Her response came faster than I expected, but instead of her usual warm reply with a time and place, it was just a link. My heart started pounding as I clicked it, opening my mother's social media page. What I saw made my blood run cold. "My heart is breaking as I write this," my mother's post began, the words dripping with false sincerity. "Our beloved daughter Rachel has run away from home. But what makes this situation even more painful is discovering that before she left, she stole a significant amount of money from our family store's register. We tried to give her everything, to show her nothing but love, and this is how she repays us. We never thought our own child could do something like this." I stared at the screen in horror as I scrolled through the comments section, watching my reputation being shredded to pieces by people who'd known me my entire life. Aunts, uncles, family friends, all expressing their shock and disappointment in me. "I can't believe Rachel would do this. She always seemed like such a good girl. After everything you've done for her. This generation has no respect. You should report this to the police. Theft is theft, even if it's family." My mother's response to the police suggestions made me feel physically sick. "No, we can't do that to our daughter. Despite everything, we love her too much. We just pray she'll come to her senses and return what she's stolen. Our hearts are broken, but we still have hope she'll make this right." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. The sheer audacity, the calculated cruelty of their lies, it was beyond anything I'd imagined them capable of. They'd thrown me out of my home, and now they were trying to destroy my reputation too. I drove straight to Grandma's house, my heart pounding the entire way. When she opened the door, her face was unreadable, but she stepped aside to let me in. "I don't believe that post for a second," she said before I could speak. "Sit down and tell me what's really going on." The words poured out of me like a broken dam. "I haven't worked at the store for 2 years, Grandma. Not since I was 16. I've been working at Coffee Corner Cafe all this time." My voice cracked. "I'm so sorry I lied to you about it." "Go on," she said quietly, her face growing darker with each word. I told her everything, about working for free from age 14, about my parents refusing to pay me because I owed them for living expenses, about their threats to keep me quiet. When I got to the part about them throwing me out on graduation night, Grandma's hands clenched into fists. "Those lying thieves," she spat, jumping up from her chair. She strode to her office and returned with a stack of papers. "Look at these payroll statements. According to these, you've been receiving a salary at the store from age 14 until now. They've been paying you on paper this whole time, even after you quit. Where do you think that money went?" My head spun as I looked at the numbers. Thousands of dollars, all in my name, all going into some account I'd never seen. Grandma was already on the phone. "James, I need you at the store immediately. Full audit. Every transaction, every account, every penny. She paused, listening. And find out exactly how much money is missing from the register, the amount they're accusing Rachel of stealing. While Grandma made calls, I opened my laptop. My hands were shaking with anger as I began typing my response to Mom's post. I've stayed quiet long enough. Here's the truth, I didn't steal anything, and I didn't run away. I was thrown out of my house on graduation night because I refused to pay rent to my own parents, something they've never asked of my brother. I haven't worked at the family store for 2 years, I've been working at Coffee Corner Cafe. My parents kicked me out with nowhere to go, and now they're trying to destroy my reputation to cover their tracks. Want proof? Ask Sarah Mitchell, the owner of Coffee Corner, where I've really been working these past 2 years. Ask about my schedule, my paychecks, my performance. Ask why my parents waited 3 weeks to mention this theft, coincidentally right when Grandma returned from vacation. I shared the post with my friends and coworkers. Within minutes, Sarah had responded. I can confirm everything Rachel has said. She's been one of our most dedicated employees for the past 2 years, working after school and weekends. Her honesty and work ethic are beyond reproach. I trust her with my business, my customers, and my reputation. These accusations against her are completely false. Within hours of my post, our family's social media erupted into chaos. The same relatives who had condemned me days earlier were now turning on my parents with fury. How dare you throw your daughter out and then lie about her? You made her work for free since she was 14? You demanded rent from your own child on graduation night? What kind of parents are you? My mother tried damage control, posting lengthy explanations that only dug her deeper. You don't understand the whole situation. But people weren't buying it anymore. Every excuse was met with screenshots of my boss's confirmation and more outraged responses. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from my parents. I ignored them all. Instead, I stayed at Grandma's house, watching as her auditor and his team tore through years of the store's financial records. Rachel, the auditor, said one evening, his face grim, "We found something serious." The numbers were staggering. Year after year, my parents had been siphoning money from the store into their personal accounts. They'd created fake vendor payments, inflated expenses, and pocketed the difference. The salary they'd supposedly been paying me? That went straight into an account under their control. But that was just the beginning. The total amount, the auditor hesitated, is over $500,000. Grandma's face turned to stone. She immediately called a family meeting at her house. I sat next to her in the living room as my parents and Tommy arrived, my father trying to look confident, my mother nervously clutching her designer purse. "Sit down," Grandma commanded. "Do you know what we found in the audit?" "Mother, I can explain," my father started. "Explain?" Grandma's voice could have cut glass. "Explain how you stole from me for years? Explain how you pocketed your own daughter's wages? Explain how you tried to frame her for theft to cover your tracks." She slapped the audit report on the coffee table. $500,000. You stole $500,000 from me, while treating your daughter like a slave and throwing her out on the street. My mother burst into tears. "Please, we can work this out." "Oh, we'll work it out all right," Grandma snapped. "You have 2 choices. Either you pay back every penny you stole, or I press charges and you both go to jail for fraud and embezzlement." The color drained from my father's face. We don't have that kind of money." "Then start selling things. Your cars, your vacation home, everything. And you'll take out loans for the rest." In the end, their expensive cars were sold. Tommy's college fund was emptied. They had to take out massive loans to cover the rest. The beautiful house I'd been thrown out of was now mortgaged to the hilt. After the audit revelations, Grandma called an emergency staff meeting at the store and announced that my parents were no longer associated with this business in any capacity. The look on my mother's face as she was escorted out of the store she'd thought she'd inherit was something I'll never forget. "I've appointed Mark Davidson as temporary manager," Grandma told me over dinner that evening. He's experienced, trustworthy, and most importantly, he knows this is a temporary position. Temporary? I asked. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Until you graduate. This store was always meant for someone who understands both business and ethics. That's you, Rachel. A week later, she made it official. The family gathered at her lawyer's office as she signed new documents, officially removing my parents from her will. The store and majority of my assets will go to Rachel, she declared, her voice firm. She's earned it, not by being born into this family, but by proving her worth through hard work and integrity. But Grandma's heart is too big to completely ignore Tommy. Your brother will receive a portion of my estate, she told me. He's not responsible for your parents' actions, and he's still my grandson. Tommy and I have grown closer through all of this, surprisingly. Without our parents' toxic influence constantly pitting us against each other, we found our way to a real sibling relationship. He stops by my dorm room sometimes, and we talk about everything, his struggles to adjust to this new reality, his own college plans now that his fund is gone, his anger at our parents for their betrayal. I'm sorry, he told me recently. For all those years I was such an entitled brat while they treated you so badly. I didn't see it then, but I see it now. As for our parents, I haven't spoken to them since that day at Grandma's house. They still try to reach out occasionally, birthday cards, holiday messages, attempts at reconciliation. I send them all back unopened. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Grandma comes to visit me at college regularly, usually bringing coffee from Corner Cafe. She's become a regular there since learning my story. We sit in the campus courtyard, discussing my classes and planning the future of the store. She's teaching me everything she knows about the business, just like she did when I was little, but now with real stakes and real purpose. You know what the most valuable thing in business is? She asked me recently. Integrity. Without it, no amount of success means anything. Your parents never understood that. But you do. Looking back at everything that's happened, I realize that while my parents' cruel treatment hurt me deeply, it also taught me invaluable lessons about who I want to be, and who I don't. Their actions showed me exactly what kind of business person I won't become. Next year, I'll graduate with my business degree. The store that was meant to be my brother's by birthright will become mine by merit. But more importantly, I'll have earned something no one can take away, the knowledge that I succeeded not because of my family's advantages, but despite their obstacles. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as its greatest challenges. My parents thought they were punishing me by making me work in that store at 14. Instead, they were giving me the experience I'd need to one day run it. They thought throwing me out would break me. Instead, it set me free. And that expensive tableware store that started all of this? Just wait until you see what I do with it. I never thought a simple photo would turn my life upside down, but that's exactly what happened last Tuesday. There I was, standing next to Mr. Peterson, our company director, both of us smiling as he shook my hand. The caption read, "Finally got that promotion. Hard work pays off. Career milestone." I didn't think much about posting it, just another career update on social media. How wrong I was. My name is Audrey, and at 25, I'd finally gotten my first big break at Marshall & Associates, moving up from entry-level manager to department head. It wasn't an easy journey, 3 years of overtime, countless presentations, and more coffee than I care to admit. But I did it on my own, and that meant everything to me. I was still riding the high of my promotion when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it instantly. My mother. 7 years of silence, and now, out of the blue, she was calling me. My hand trembled as I stared at the screen. "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Audrey, sweetheart." My mother's voice was exactly as I remembered it, that sickly sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "Your father and I just saw your post. We're so proud of you." Proud. The word hit me like a slap. Where was that pride when I needed it most? Thanks, I managed to say, gripping my desk to steady myself. We should celebrate. Why don't you come over this weekend? We can discuss throwing a proper party for you. The whole family would love to see how successful you've become. The whole family, including Sarah, my younger sister. The golden child, the favorite. The one who could do no wrong. I'll think about it, I said, my throat tight. Please do, darling. We've missed you so much. It's time to put the past behind us, don't you think? After we hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at nothing. 7 years of silence, broken because of a social media post. 7 years since I'd walked out of that house, vowing never to return. 7 years of building a life without them. My hand brushed against the medical alert bracelet on my wrist, the one that warned about my peanut allergy. The same allergy that my parents had treated as an inconvenience, and Sarah had used as ammunition for her cruel jokes. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind, family is who treats you like family, not just who shares your blood. She'd been my real parent these past 7 years, supporting me through college, believing in me when no one else did. The words, "we're proud of you," kept echoing in my head. Funny how those words could feel so hollow coming from one person and so genuine from another. I looked at the photo on my desk, me and Grandma at my college graduation. She was beaming with real pride that day, not the manufactured kind my parents were suddenly showing. The phone call from Mom had ripped open old wounds, and now the past came rushing back like a flood. Sarah was 3 years younger than me, but from the moment she was born, she became the center of our family's universe. While I got practical clothes from discount stores, Sarah had designer outfits. My parents would document her every move with expensive cameras, while my school achievements gathered dust in drawers. I remember my 10th birthday clearly. I'd been hoping for the art set I'd been eyeing for months, nothing fancy, just a basic kit with colored pencils and a sketchbook. Instead, I got a pack of No. 2 pencils, because they're what you need for school anyway. That same year, for Sarah's 7th birthday, our parents transformed the entire backyard into a Disney Princess Wonderland, complete with a hired Cinderella. Sarah's just more artistic, Mom would say when relatives questioned the disparity. She needs proper tools to develop her talent. You have to understand, my Aunt Jessica once said to my parents during a family dinner, children should be loved equally. This isn't right. I can still see Mom's dismissive wave. Oh, Jessica, you don't have children. You don't understand. Our girls are just different. Sarah has real potential. The worst part wasn't even the material things, it was the constant emotional undermining. Like the time I won first place in the state math competition. Instead of congratulations, Mom said, "That's nice, dear, but did you see Sarah's painting got displayed in the school hallway?" My grandmother saw through it all. "This isn't right, Margaret," she'd tell my mother. "You're raising one child to be entitled and the other to feel worthless." "Mom, please," my mother would respond with an eye roll. "Sarah is gifted. Audrey is, well, Audrey is ordinary. We're just being realistic about their capabilities." Sarah learned quickly how to exploit her position. She'd break something and blame me, knowing our parents would believe her without question. She'd accidentally spill juice on my homework, then cry when I got upset, making me look like the bad guy. Once, she even told her friends they couldn't play with me because I was the boring sister. The day I got accepted into the advanced mathematics program at school, Sarah had a minor role in a school play. Guess which event my parents attended? I sat alone in the math classroom during the awards ceremony, watching other parents beam with pride at their children. My certificate was signed by my teacher and the principal, but my parents never even saw it. "Your sister needs us more," Dad would say whenever I tried to express my feelings. "She has real talents to nurture. You're more independent." Independent wasn't a compliment, it was their way of justifying their negligence. Even our relatives could see it. During family gatherings, conversations would halt when Sarah would dramatically demand attention or deliberately exclude me from activities. The adults would exchange uncomfortable glances, but my parents remained oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Mine came in the form of a peanut butter sandwich at Grandma's house when I was 12. I'd eaten peanut butter countless times before, it was actually one of my favorite foods. But that day was different. "Want a sandwich, sweetheart?" Grandma had asked, making her famous peanut butter and honey combination. I nodded eagerly, watching her spread the creamy peanut butter across the bread. 3 bites in, something felt wrong. My throat started to tighten, and breathing became increasingly difficult. I remember dropping the sandwich, my hands clutching at my throat. What happened next is still a blur in my memory. Grandma's quick thinking saved my life. She immediately recognized the signs of anaphylaxis and called 911. I remember her holding my hand in the ambulance, her voice steady but scared. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Just keep breathing." My parents arrived at the hospital about an hour later, clearly annoyed at having to leave work. Mom was tapping her foot impatiently while the doctor explained about severe peanut allergies and how they can develop suddenly, even if you've never had problems before. "She'll need to carry an EpiPen at all times," the doctor emphasized. "And you'll need to be very careful about checking ingredients in everything she eats. Cross-contamination can be dangerous too." Dad nodded absently, checking his watch. Mom was already on her phone, probably texting Sarah's dance instructor about being late for pickup. The ride home was worse than the hospital. They waited until we were in the car, before letting their true feelings show. "This is just perfect," Mom muttered. "As if we don't have enough to deal with. First the math tutoring, now this," Dad added. "Everything with you has to be complicated, doesn't it, Audrey?" I pressed myself against the car door, trying to make myself as small as possible. My throat was still sore from the reaction, but their words hurt more than any physical pain. The years that followed were a careful dance of reading labels and carrying EpiPens. Grandma made sure I had proper medical alert bracelets and helped me learn how to advocate for myself. She even called the school to make sure they understood the severity of my condition. Sarah, of course, found endless amusement in my new medical condition. She'd wave peanut butter sandwiches in my face, laughing when I flinched away. "Oh, sorry," she'd say with fake innocence. "I forgot you're allergic to everything now." At family gatherings, she'd loudly announce, "Be careful everyone, Audrey might die if she eats the wrong thing," making me feel like even more of an outsider. My parents never corrected her behavior. If anything, they seemed annoyed by my need for caution. I learned to pack my own meals, check every label 3 times, and never trust food I hadn't personally verified. It was exhausting, but it became my normal. My high school graduation should have been a moment of triumph. Full scholarship to Northwestern State University, I'd done it entirely on my own, maintaining straight A's while juggling part-time jobs and my constant vigilance about food allergies. The acceptance letter felt like validation for all those nights I'd spent studying while Sarah's music blasted through the walls from her bedroom. The family dinner where I announced my college acceptance is forever etched in my memory. "I got into Northwestern," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Full academic scholarship." "That's nice, dear," Mom said, barely looking up from her plate. "The thing is," I continued, gripping my fork tightly, "I'll need help with housing. The scholarship covers tuition, but not accommodation. I've looked into the costs, and..." "No," Dad's response was immediate and flat. "You chose to apply to a college in another state. That was your decision. We're saving for Sarah's education. She's planning to attend Juilliard in 2 years, and that's not cheap." I stared at my plate, fighting back tears. Sarah smirked from across the table, twirling her pasta with deliberate slowness. "But it's just the housing cost," I tried again. "The scholarship covers everything else." "Audrey," Mom's voice was sharp. "We've made our decision. If you want to go to college out of state, you'll have to figure out the housing situation yourself." That's when the front door opened, and Grandma walked in, holding a congratulations balloon and a small gift bag. Her smile faded as she took in the scene, my red eyes, Sarah's smug expression, our parents' cold faces. "What's going on?" she asked, looking around the table. Sarah giggled, always eager to twist the knife. "Oh, Audrey got into college, but she'll be living on the street because Mom and Dad won't pay for her housing. They're saving their money for my Juilliard education instead." The silence that followed was deafening. "Is this true?" Grandma's voice was quiet but sharp. When no one answered, she continued, "Margaret, Richard, how dare you? Your daughter earned a full scholarship, and you won't even help her with housing?" "Mom, please," my mother sighed. "Sarah's education." "Sarah's education?" Grandma's voice rose. "What about Audrey's education? What about supporting both your children? And you," she turned to Sarah, who was still wearing that satisfied smirk, "you're becoming a cruel, spoiled child. I'm ashamed of how you're behaving." Sarah's face crumpled, and she burst into tears, her usual tactic when things didn't go her way. Mom and Dad immediately rushed to comfort her, shooting angry glares at Grandma and me. "This is exactly what we mean," Mom snapped. "Audrey and you, Mom, you're always causing problems. Always making everything difficult." Something inside me snapped. Without a word, I stood up and walked out of the dining room. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, pulled out my old duffel bag, and started throwing in clothes. Grandma appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. "Pack everything you need, sweetheart. You're coming home with me." "But college," I started. "Will be taken care of," she said firmly. "I'll pay for your housing. You focus on your studies and building your future." 20 minutes later, we walked out of that house together, leaving behind my parents' angry voices and Sarah's theatrical sobs. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. College life was everything I'd hoped for and more. My tiny apartment near campus became my sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe freely without walking on eggshells. Grandma visited often. She never missed a birthday, a holiday, or any milestone in my life. My parents and Sarah, on the other hand, became ghosts. No calls on Christmas, no cards on my birthday, not even a text message during graduation. 7 years of complete silence. So when I found myself standing on their doorstep after that phone call about my promotion, it felt surreal. The house hadn't changed, same cream-colored walls, same manicured lawn, same brass knocker that I used to have to stretch to reach. Mom opened the door with an enthusiastic "Audrey" that seemed rehearsed. She pulled me into a hug that felt foreign and stiff. The living room was exactly as I remembered it, still dominated by Sarah's achievements. Her Juilliard degree held the place of honor above the fireplace. She sat in Dad's old armchair, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my presence except to roll her eyes when Mom gushed about my promotion. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," Mom kept saying, the words sounding hollow after 7 years of silence. "Aren't we, Richard?" Dad nodded from his spot on the couch. "Very proud. Making your way up in a big company like that. We should celebrate properly," Mom continued, her voice taking on that familiar planning tone I remembered from all of Sarah's parties. "A big family gathering, right here at home. Everyone would love to see you, Aunt Jessica, all your cousins." "Grandmother too?" I asked pointedly. Of course," Mom said quickly, though I caught her slight grimace. "We want to make things right, Audrey. It's been too long. Let's say, 2 weeks from now? Give everyone time to make arrangements?" I found myself nodding, though every instinct screamed this was wrong. "Sure, that sounds nice." The 2 weeks leading up to the party were strange. Work kept me busy with my new responsibilities, but my phone buzzed constantly with messages from my suddenly attentive family. Mom sent daily texts about party preparations. Sarah, who hadn't acknowledged my existence for 7 years, suddenly sent me a friend request on social media with a message that read, "Time to put the past behind us, sis." Grandma was ecstatic about the reconciliation. "This is all I've ever wanted," she told me over our weekly dinner. "For my family to be whole again. The day of the party arrived warm and sunny. I pulled up to my parents' house to find cars already lining the street. Inside, the house buzzed with activity. Aunt Jessica's daughter, Emma, darted around with her phone, recording everything like a tiny documentary filmmaker. The smell of catering filled the air, all nut-free, I noticed with surprise. "Audrey," Grandma enveloped me in a warm hug. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Aunt Jessica hugged me next. "So proud of you, kiddo. Department head at your age, that's incredible." Sarah stood by the stairs in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, greeting guests with her practiced pageant smile. Our parents fluttered around, playing the perfect hosts, as if the last 7 years had never happened. When everyone was seated at the elaborately decorated dining table, Mom clinked her glass for attention. "We're so happy to have everyone here today," she began, smiling broadly. "As you know, we're celebrating Audrey's promotion." She paused for polite applause. "It's wonderful to see her finally finding her footing in the corporate world." I should have known the word "finally" was a warning sign. "And speaking of success," Mom continued, her voice brightening, "I'd like to take a moment to talk about our Sarah. Many of you know she graduated from Juilliard with honors last year. She's such a talented artist, truly gifted." The next 5 minutes were a detailed recap of Sarah's achievements, ending with, "And now that Audrey has this wonderful position and the ear of management, we're hoping she'll help her incredibly qualified sister join this prestigious company." The table fell silent. I could feel Grandma's eyes on me, see Aunt Jessica's uncomfortable shift in her chair. Emma kept her phone trained on the scene, capturing every excruciating moment. "Actually," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I'm not in a position to hire anyone. I'm a department head, not a director. I don't make hiring decisions." Mom's smile tightened. "But surely with your new influence." "Excuse me," I cut her off, standing up. "Mom, Dad, can we talk privately?" They followed me into the kitchen, their practiced smiles dropping as soon as we were alone. "I thought this was supposed to be a celebration of my promotion," I said quietly. "Not a networking event for Sarah." "Don't be selfish, Audrey," Mom snapped. "Sarah needs this opportunity. Family helps family." "Selfish?" I repeated in disbelief. "After 7 years of no contact, you reach out only because you want something from me, and I'm the selfish one?" Dad's face hardened. "We've given Sarah every advantage, invested everything in her future. The least you could do is help your sister now that you're in a position to do so." We returned to the dining room, the tension following us like a storm cloud. I sat down, trying to ignore the concerned glances from Grandma and Aunt Jessica. The catering staff had served the main course while we were gone, some kind of elegant chicken dish with a creamy sauce. I took a few bites, my mind still churning from the conversation in the kitchen. The sauce had an interesting flavor, nutty, almost. My throat suddenly felt tight. A familiar panic gripped me as I realized what was happening. "Peanuts," I managed to gasp, my hand already fumbling for my purse and the EpiPen inside. "There's peanuts." The room began to spin. I could hear chairs scraping, voices raising in alarm. Grandma's voice cut through the chaos, "Someone call 911." Everything after that became a blur of sounds and shadows. The last thing I remember was the feeling of my throat closing and Grandma's hands gripping mine. I woke up to the steady beep of hospital monitors. My throat felt raw, my body heavy. Grandma sat beside my bed, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. "Oh, thank God," she whispered when she saw my eyes open. "We almost lost you, sweetheart. The doctors said it was one of the worst anaphylactic reactions they've seen." I tried to speak, but my throat was too sore. "Don't try to talk yet," Grandma said, squeezing my hand. "You've been out for several hours. The EpiPen and the paramedics barely got to you in time." I managed to rasp out, "How? The food, they knew." Before Grandma could answer, Aunt Jessica burst into the room with Emma close behind. Emma clutched her phone, her young face uncharacteristically serious. Audrey," Aunt Jessica's voice shook with anger. "There's something you need to see. Emma, show her." Emma stepped forward, her hands trembling as she held out her phone. "I was recording everything at the party," she said quietly. "I got this when you were in the kitchen with your parents." The video showed the dining room from an angle near the dessert table. I could see myself leaving for the kitchen with my parents. Then, clear as day, Sarah stood up and walked to my place setting. She reached into her designer purse, pulled out a small jar, and quickly stirred something into my food. The smirk on her face was unmistakable. "That's peanut butter," Aunt Jessica said, her voice hard. "Your sister deliberately put peanut butter in your food, knowing full well about your allergy." I stared at the phone screen, watching the scene play out again. Sarah, my own sister, had tried to. "She could have killed you," Grandma's voice broke. She knew exactly what she was doing. The four of us sat in stunned silence, watching the damning evidence again and again. The casual way she'd done it, the slight smile on her face as she stirred the peanut butter into my food, it was calculated, deliberate. I left the hospital against medical advice, driven by a mix of rage and disbelief. The video on Emma's phone felt heavy in my pocket. She'd sent it to me before I left. When I pulled up to my parents' house, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. They were all in the living room, Mom, Dad, and Sarah. Acting as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't nearly died at their dinner table hours earlier. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, barely looking up from her phone. "Shouldn't you be in the hospital, being dramatic?" "I know what you did," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I know you put peanut butter in my food." Sarah's head snapped up, her face a mask of outrage. Mom jumped to her feet. "How dare you accuse your sister?" she spat. "Haven't you caused enough problems?" I pulled out my phone, pulled up the video, and pressed play. The room fell silent except for the damning evidence playing on the screen. Sarah, methodically stirring peanut butter into my food, that self-satisfied smirk on her face. The color drained from Sarah's face. Then, incredibly, she laughed. "Oh come on, it was just a prank. You're always so serious about everything." "A prank?" My voice shook. "I could have died. Do you understand that? The doctors said I barely made it." "Oh, please," Mom waved her hand dismissively. "You're being melodramatic. Sarah was just having a bit of fun." "Fun?" I stared at them in disbelief. I had anaphylactic shock. My heart nearly stopped. "Listen carefully," Dad's voice turned cold. "If you even think about taking this to the police, you're no longer our daughter. We'll disinherit you completely." In that moment, everything became crystal clear. These people weren't my family. They never had been. I walked out without another word, got in my car, and drove home. My hands were steady now. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Sitting at my computer, I uploaded the video to my social media. Below it, I wrote, "Today I learned what family truly means. And these people are not it. My own sister deliberately poisoned me with peanuts, knowing about my severe allergy. My parents called it a prank. This is the last time I will ever call them family." The response was immediate and explosive. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years commented in shock and outrage. Aunt Jessica shared the video, adding her own scathing commentary. Friends and colleagues expressed horror and support. My parents and Sarah fought back in the comments, calling me an attention seeker, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But the video spoke for itself. The next morning, I walked into the police station and filed a formal report. That afternoon, my parents' lawyer delivered a formal document. They were officially disowning me and removing me from their will. Sarah posted a tearful video about how I was destroying the family with my lies. But I wasn't alone. Grandma called me that evening. "I've spoken to my lawyer," she said firmly. "I'm cutting them off completely. You're my only heir now, Audrey. You've always been more my daughter than Margaret's anyway." I sat on my couch that night, reading the flood of messages, support from real family members, from friends, from colleagues. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, "You're still my favorite cousin. Mom says you can come over for dinner anytime." 7 years ago, I'd walked away from a toxic family. This time, I was running toward a real one. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have. Sometimes you have to build your own. Growing up in the small town of Millbrook, our 2-story house wasn't much to look at, but it was home. My parents, both teachers at the local school, made sure my sister Jane and I never went without, even if we weren't swimming in luxury. They had this way of stretching a teacher's salary to make everything work, and somehow, they always did. Jane was my big sister, my best friend, and everything I wasn't. While I preferred the quiet company of books and sketch pads, she was like a firecracker that lit up every room she entered. I can still picture us as kids, climbing the old oak tree in our backyard, making up wild stories about being explorers or royal princesses. Those were simpler times, before our paths started to diverge. As we grew older, the differences between us became more pronounced. Jane was everything I wasn't, outgoing, talented, and seemingly perfect in every way. She wrote poetry that made our English teacher cry, starred in every school play, and still found time to be a star player on the basketball team. Meanwhile, I was just there. The quiet one. The one who'd rather spend lunch break in the library with a book than in the cafeteria with crowds. Our parents never played favorites, at least not openly. They celebrated Jane's achievements with the same enthusiasm they showed for my decent grades and quiet accomplishments. But there was always this unspoken understanding that Jane was destined for greater things. When college acceptance letters started arriving, it wasn't a surprise that Jane got into Riverside University, one of the most prestigious schools in the state. I still remember the day she got her letter. Mom and Dad couldn't stop crying with joy. "Our baby's going to Riverside," Mom exclaimed, hugging Jane tight. "We always knew you were special." Dad was already on the phone, calling relatives. "Did you hear? Jane got into Riverside. Full academic scholarship." That was the beginning of the real divide between us. Not that we stopped loving each other, but life has a way of pulling people in different directions. Jane moved to the city, and I stayed behind, still in our childhood home, still trying to figure out who I was supposed to be. Little did I know then that our sisterly bond would be tested in ways I never could have imagined. That a single golden ring would shatter everything we'd built over the years, and force me to question everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and forgiveness. The phone calls home from Jane became a weekly ritual of success stories and achievements. Each time, I'd sit at the kitchen table, watching Mom's face light up as Jane shared her latest triumph at Riverside. "Did you hear?" Mom would gush to anyone who'd listen. Jane's research paper was published in the university's psychology journal. "She's only a sophomore." Dad would chime in, "And she's maintaining a 4.0 GPA while doing all this extra research. That's our girl." I spent those 2 years after high school working at the local diner, saving what I could for community college. When I finally enrolled at Millbrook Community College, my parents managed a smile and a "That's nice, dear." It wasn't Riverside, but it was something. "You know, Jane was on local TV again yesterday," Mom announced during dinner one evening. They interviewed her about her research on childhood development. She looked so professional. "That's great," I mumbled, pushing my peas around my plate. I worked hard at my studies, I really did. But somehow, getting a B+ in Introduction to Business didn't quite measure up to Jane's published papers and television appearances. My achievements were like candlelight next to her spotlight. After graduation, reality hit hard. While Jane was already establishing herself at Preston Medical Center as a rising star in their psychology department, I was dropping off resumes at local businesses with no callbacks. That's how I ended up working at Aunt Sarah's store as an assistant administrator. She took me on with that look of pity I was getting used to seeing. "It's just temporary," Aunt Sarah said, showing me around. "Until you find something more suitable for someone with a degree." Then came the news that changed everything. Jane called one Sunday evening, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, Dad, I met someone," she squealed over speakerphone. "His name is Michael, and he's a lawyer at Blackwell and Associates. His family owns half the buildings downtown." I watched my parents exchange knowing looks of approval. Of course Jane would find someone as successful as she was. "He's taking me to Paris next month," Jane continued. "His family has an apartment there, can you believe it?" "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom exclaimed, while Dad beamed with pride. I sat there, in my old sweatpants, still living in my childhood bedroom, making minimum wage at my aunt's store. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Jane, the successful psychologist dating a wealthy lawyer, and me, the underachieving sister who couldn't seem to get her life started. "When do we get to meet him?" Mom asked eagerly. "Soon. He's taking me to that new French restaurant this weekend, but maybe next week we could come for dinner?" I excused myself from the kitchen before they could see the tears welling up in my eyes. It wasn't that I wasn't happy for Jane, I was. But each of her successes somehow felt like they were highlighting my failures. Every step forward she took seemed to push me 2 steps back in comparison. Holidays became a showcase of Jane's exciting life. She'd sweep into our parents' house like a celebrity, bringing stories of important clients, breakthrough therapy sessions, and glamorous dates with Michael. And then the CEO himself thanked me in front of the entire board, she'd say over Thanksgiving dinner, while I quietly passed the mashed potatoes. "Tell them about that conference in Boston, honey," Mom would prompt, beaming with pride. I'd sit there in my work clothes from the store, still living in my childhood bedroom, because minimum wage doesn't get you your own apartment in this economy. Even my aunt's employee discount couldn't help me save enough to move out. Then came the announcement we all knew was coming. It was during Christmas dinner when Jane stood up, Michael beside her, both grinning ear to ear. "We're getting married," she squealed, extending her left hand to reveal a stunning gold ring with a diamond that caught every light in the room. "It's been in my family for generations," Michael explained proudly. "My great-grandfather gave it to my great-grandmother in 1925. Mom burst into tears of joy, Dad opened his best bottle of wine, and I forced a smile while something heavy settled in my stomach. The next few months were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Jane was at the house constantly, turning our modest home into wedding planning central. Every surface seemed covered with bridal magazines, color swatches, and guest lists. One Saturday in early spring, I had a rare day off. I was sprawled on my bed with my worn copy of Pride and Prejudice when I heard Jane and Mom in the garden below my window. "These roses will look perfect for the reception," Jane was saying. "We should plant more along this fence." "Careful with your ring, sweetie," Mom cautioned. "Those thorns can catch on anything." "You're right," Jane replied. "This glove keeps catching on it. I'll just put it here on the bench for now." I returned to my book, half listening to their chatter about flower arrangements and table settings. The afternoon sun was warm through my window, and I was just getting to my favorite part when I heard Mom's voice. "We should get more fertilizer if we're planting all these new roses. Let's run to the garden center." "Good idea," Jane agreed. "Chris, we're going to the store. Be back soon." I mumbled an acknowledgement, too engrossed in my book to really pay attention. The house fell quiet except for the distant sound of birds in the garden. When they returned, the peace was shattered by Jane's panicked voice. "Mom? Mom, the ring. It's gone." I looked up from my book at the commotion. Through my window, I could see Jane and Mom frantically searching around the wooden bench, pushing aside gardening tools and flower pots. "It was right here." Jane's voice was getting higher with panic. "I put it right here on the bench." "Don't worry, honey, we'll find it," Mom assured her, but I could hear the worry in her voice. "It has to be here somewhere." They searched until the sun started to set, combing through every inch of the garden, but the ring was nowhere to be found. That's when I first saw it in their eyes when they looked up at my window, that flicker of suspicion that would soon grow into something much darker. With shaking hands, Jane dialed Michael's number. I could hear his voice through the phone from across the room, growing louder with each word. "What do you mean you lost it?" His voice boomed through the speaker. "That ring has been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandmother wore that ring through 2 world wars." "I'm so sorry," Jane sobbed. "We'll find it, I promise." "You'd better find it." The violence in his voice made me flinch. "I don't care what it takes. That ring is irreplaceable." After she hung up, Jane turned to me, her face twisted with an expression I'd never seen before. "You took it, didn't you?" "What?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "Jane, I was in my room the whole time." "Exactly. You were the only one here." She was screaming now, mascara running down her cheeks. "You've always been jealous of me." Mom stepped forward, her face hard. "Christina, if you took the ring, you need to return it right now." "I didn't take anything." My voice cracked. "I swear." "Then you won't mind if we search your room," Dad said, already heading for the stairs. I followed them up to my bedroom, watching helplessly as they tore it apart. They rifled through my drawers, emptied my jewelry box, flipped my mattress, and dumped out my purse. Books scattered across the floor, clothes were strewn everywhere, and even my private diary was read page by page. "It has to be here somewhere," Jane muttered, throwing my sweaters onto the floor. Hours of searching turned into days, then a week. Each day, the accusations grew worse. "Just admit it," Jane cornered me in the kitchen one morning. "We all know you took it because you're jealous. You can't stand that I'm getting married while you can't even get a date." "Jane, please. Look at you," she spat. 27 years old, living with Mom and Dad, working a pathetic job that Aunt Sarah gave you out of pity. You're a loser, Christina, and you couldn't stand to see me happy." Mom stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "We're going to call the police if you don't return it." "Go ahead," I shouted back, finally breaking. "Call them. I have nothing to hide because I didn't take your precious ring." Each word was like a knife, cutting deeper than the last. The worst part wasn't the accusations or the threats, it was the look in their eyes. The absolute certainty that I was guilty, that I was capable of betraying my own sister out of jealousy and spite. Word spreads fast in a small town. Within days, my parents' version of events had reached every corner of Millbrook. At the grocery store, former neighbors avoided my gaze. At church, people who'd known me since childhood suddenly found reasons to sit in different pews. I was restocking shelves at my aunt's store when I heard her voice behind me. "Christina," Aunt Sarah's tone made me freeze. "We need to talk." In her small office, she didn't even offer me a seat. "Your mother called me this morning." "Aunt Sarah, please." She held up her hand. "I took a chance on you when no one else would. And this is how you repay me? By stealing your sister's engagement ring?" "I didn't." "Clean out your locker and turn in your keys." Her voice was ice. "I won't have a thief working in my store." The walk home felt like a death march. Maybe Mom and Dad would finally see how this was destroying my life. Maybe they'd realize I would never do this. I found them in the kitchen. "Aunt Sarah fired me," I said, my voice small. Mom didn't even look up from her coffee. "Pack your things." "What?" "You heard your mother," Dad said. "We want you out by tomorrow morning." The room started spinning. "You're kicking me out? Where am I supposed to go?" "Maybe you should have thought about that before you stole from your sister." Mom finally looked at me, her eyes harder than I'd ever seen them. "You brought shame to this family, Christina. I can't even look at my friends in the face anymore." "I'm your daughter," I whispered. "No daughter of mine would do what you've done." Her words cut like glass. "You have until morning." I stumbled upstairs in a daze, pulling my old gym bag from the closet. How do you pack up a life in one bag? Which pieces of yourself do you choose to take? Clothes went in first, enough for a week, maybe 2. 1 pair of sensible shoes. My laptop, wrapped in a sweater. Then came the harder choices. The books that had been my friends when I had none: Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, Little Women. Stories of other women who had to find their way in a hostile world. Through it all, I couldn't stop crying. These walls had heard my first words, seen my first steps. This room had been my refuge through every storm of my life. Now it was just another place I wasn't welcome. My phone buzzed with messages from old friends: "I can't believe you would do this," and "How could you?" and "Don't contact me again." Sitting on my stripped bed, surrounded by the remnants of my life, I realized there was nothing left for me in Millbrook. Every bridge was burned, every door closed. Whatever I was going to become, it wouldn't be here. I had to leave. Not just this house, but this town, these memories, this life that had become a prison of accusations and distrust. Somewhere out there, I had to believe, was a place where I could start over. Where no one knew me as the sister who stole the ring, the daughter who betrayed her family, the girl who wasn't good enough. At 3 a.m., while staring at my phone's dwindling contact list, I remembered Rachel. We'd been close in college, before life pulled us in different directions. My fingers shook as I dialed her number, praying she still used it. "Chris?" Her voice was groggy with sleep. "What's wrong?" The whole story poured out of me between sobs. When I finished, there was a long pause. "I have a spare room," she said finally. "I'm in Portland now. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it." I checked my bank account, $342.17. Just enough for a one-way bus ticket to Oregon and maybe a meal or two. "When can you come?" Rachel asked. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "I have to leave tomorrow." The bus ride took 2 days. I spent most of it staring out the window, watching the familiar landscapes of my life fade into unknown territory. My gym bag sat on my lap like a life preserver, everything I now owned contained in one small space. Rachel was waiting at the station, just like she promised. She hugged me without hesitation, and for the first time in weeks, I felt human again. "The store where I work is hiring," she said as we drove to her apartment. "It's just retail, but it's something." I started the next day. The store manager took one look at my business degree and my desperate eyes and handed me a name tag. "You start on Register 3. I threw myself into the work like it was a lifeline. Every shift, every sale, every minute was 1 minute further from Millbrook and the wreckage I'd left behind. When other employees complained about long hours, I volunteered to stay longer. When they grumbled about difficult customers, I took them on with a smile. 3 months in, they made me a floor supervisor. 2 months after that, assistant manager. By the 8-month mark, I was managing my own department. "You're different from most people we promote," my district manager said during my review. "You have hunger." He was right. I was hungry, not just for success, but for vindication, for proof that I could be more than what my family thought I was. The day I signed the lease on my own apartment was the day I finally felt free. It was small, just a studio with a kitchenette, but it was mine. No one could tell me to leave, no one could search through my things, no one could question my right to be there. I changed my phone number that same day. Deleted every social media account. Erased every digital footprint that could lead back to Millbrook. Rachel thought I was being extreme, but she didn't argue. "They're still your family," she said once, carefully. "No," I replied, unpacking boxes in my new place. "Family believes in you. Family stands by you." They stopped being my family the day they chose not to believe me. At night, in my new bed, in my new life, I sometimes wondered about them. Was Jane married now? Did Mom still garden? Did Dad still read the paper every morning at the kitchen table? But wondering was dangerous. Wondering led to doubting, and doubting led to that dark place where I questioned everything, including myself. So I focused on work, on building something new, on becoming someone who couldn't be dismissed or discarded. Someone who didn't need anyone else's approval or belief. Someone who could survive being erased from her own family story. Despite my best efforts to move forward, there were nights when curiosity got the better of me. On those nights, I'd ask Rachel to check Jane's social media accounts from her phone. She got married, Rachel told me one evening, scrolling through photos. Big white dress, church wedding. Your parents look happy in the pictures. I nodded, pretending the information didn't cut like a knife. A year later, she's pregnant, Rachel reported, showing me a photo of Jane cradling her belly, Michael's hand protectively placed over hers. She looked radiant. For years passed this way, me building my new life in Portland while getting occasional glimpses of my old one through Rachel's phone screen. For years of watching my family's life continue without me, through carefully curated photos and posts that never mentioned the missing daughter, the lost sister. Then came the call that changed everything. Chris, Rachel's voice was breathless. You need to see this. She sent me a screenshot of Jane's latest post. To my sister Christina, I'm sorry. I was wrong. If anyone knows where she is, please help me find her. I need to make this right. Please share this post. Help me find my sister. I stared at the words until they blurred. It's probably some kind of trick, I said finally. I don't think so, Rachel replied softly. Look at the comments. Your parents are there too, begging you to contact them. My hands shook as I read their comments. Mom, please come home, sweetheart. We need to talk to you. Dad, we made a terrible mistake. Please give us a chance. After 4 years of silence, their words seemed surreal. But something in their desperation felt genuine. I called the old house number, half expecting it to be disconnected. Mom answered on the first ring. Hello? Her voice hadn't changed. It's me, I said quietly. The sharp intake of breath, then, Christina? Oh God, Christina. I could hear her crying, calling for Dad. Their voices tumbled over each other. Please come home. We need to see you. There's something you need to know. I can come next weekend, I heard myself say. The drive back to Millbrook was the longest of my life. Each mile marker brought back memories I'd tried so hard to bury. The town looked exactly the same, as if it had been frozen in time while I'd been away. Jane's car was in the driveway when I arrived. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked up the familiar path to the front door. They were all waiting in the living room, Mom, Dad, and Jane. 4 years had changed them too. Mom's hair was grayer, Dad looked smaller somehow, and Jane was holding a sleeping baby about 4 years old on her lap. We found it, Mom said, her voice breaking. The ring. We found it. Dad stepped forward. We were replanting the roses last week, and there it was, tangled in the roots. Right where? Right where I knocked it off the bench that day, Jane finished, tears streaming down her face. The ring fell, and then we covered it with soil while planting. It's been there all this time, growing deeper with the roses. The revelation broke something in all of us. Suddenly, the living room was filled with raw, uncontrolled sobbing. Mom collapsed into Dad's arms, her whole body shaking. Dad's quiet composure finally cracked as tears streamed down his weathered face. Jane sank to her knees, her cries waking her sleeping son. And I, after 4 years of holding everything inside, of being strong, of surviving, I finally let go. The tears came in waves, years of pain and loneliness pouring out in gut-wrenching sobs. I'm so sorry, Chris, Jane choked out between gasps. I was horrible to you. Cruel. Unforgivable. I let my fear and Michael's anger cloud my judgment. I chose to believe the worst about my own sister. Mom reached for my hand, but stopped short, uncertain. We failed you as parents, she whispered through her tears. We should have believed in you, protected you. Instead, She couldn't finish. Please, Jane pleaded, tell us how to make this right. I'll do anything. We all will. I looked at them, these people who had once been my whole world, then my worst nightmare, and now I wasn't sure what they were. I can't just pretend the last 4 years didn't happen, I said finally, wiping my eyes. You didn't just accuse me, you condemned me. Turned the whole town against me. Threw me out with nothing but a gym bag and no place to go. What if? Mom hesitated, then continued, what if we saw someone? A family therapist? Someone who could help us rebuild what we broke. Once a month, Dad added quickly, his voice still thick with emotion. As long as it takes. I looked at the little boy on the couch, my nephew, I realized with a start. He had Jane's nose and Michael's dark hair. 4 years of his life had passed without an aunt. I'm not moving back to Millbrook, I said firmly. I have a life in Portland now. A good job. Friends who stood by me when no one else would. We understand, Jane said. We don't deserve to have you back in our lives. But if you're willing to try, even a little. It took 3 months before I agreed to my first holiday visit, Thanksgiving. I brought Rachel with me for support. The dinner was awkward, full of careful conversations and avoided topics, but it was a start. Dr. Martinez, our family therapist, helps us navigate the harder conversations. In her office, we talk about trust and betrayal, about the weight of expectations and the poison of assumptions. Sometimes we leave her sessions angry or hurt, old wounds reopened. But slowly, carefully, we're learning to hear each other. Jane's son, my nephew Tommy, is the easiest part. 4-year-olds don't carry grudges or remember family sins. To him, I'm just Aunt Chris, who brings him books from Portland and teaches him to draw. His innocent love is like a bridge between who we were and who we might become. The roses still bloom in Mom's garden, including the ones that grew around that ring for 4 years. Sometimes I look at them and think about how truth, like a ring in the earth, can get buried under layers of assumptions and accusations. But truth, like those roses, finds its way to the surface eventually. I'm not the same person who left Millbrook with a gym bag and a broken heart. They're not the same people who cast me out. We're all learning that healing, like gardening, takes time, patience, and constant care. Some days are harder than others, but we keep trying. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs. But when you're in love, your heart has a way of glossing over the red flags your mind tries to wave at you. I'm Rose, and this is the story of how I met my husband and his family. David and I both worked at TechCore Solutions as software developers. He caught my eye right away, not just because he was handsome, but because he had this quiet confidence about him. Unlike some of our colleagues who lived and breathed code, David could actually hold a conversation about other things. Hey, did you catch the new episode of Black Mirror last night? He asked one morning, stopping by my desk with 2 cups of coffee. That was how it started, simple conversations about shared interests that grew into something more. We discovered we both loved sci-fi shows, hiking on weekends, and had the same terrible taste in B-movies. Our lunch breaks got longer, and our after-work quick coffees turned into dinner dates. Before I knew it, a year had passed, and David wanted me to meet his family. They're really down to earth, he assured me as we drove to his mother's house. Mom's excited to meet you, and my sister Sarah lives there too, with her husband Mike and their son Tommy. The house was modest but well kept, with toys scattered across the front yard. Sarah opened the door before we could knock, bouncing her 4-year-old on her hip. Finally, she exclaimed, pulling David into a hug. Mom, they're here. Linda, David's mother, appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron and a warm smile. There's my successful son, she beamed, hugging him tight before turning to me. And this must be Rose. David's told us so much about you. During dinner, I watched how they interacted. They seemed like a normal family, clearly proud of David's achievements at work. But something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it until Sarah started talking about Tommy's upcoming birthday. David, she said, giving him her best puppy dog eyes, Tommy's been begging for that new Nintendo game. The one with the dinosaurs? Sarah, David started, but his mother jumped in. Oh, let him spoil his nephew a little. You're doing so well at that fancy tech company, Linda laughed, patting David's hand. Then she turned to me with what seemed like a light-hearted smile. I just hope after the wedding, he won't forget he has a mother and sister to take care of too. I smiled politely, thinking she was joking. Everyone laughed, and the conversation moved on. I didn't realize then that her words weren't actually a joke at all. 6 months later, David and I got married in a small ceremony. We found a nice apartment for rent near our office, and I thought we were starting our life together perfectly. The honeymoon phase of our marriage didn't last long, literally. We'd barely unpacked our suitcases from our actual honeymoon when the requests started rolling in. First, it was Sarah calling about Tommy's school supplies. Then Linda needed help with some home repairs. The requests were endless, and each time, David would pull out his wallet without hesitation. At first, I tried to ignore it. The amounts weren't huge, and David made good money at TechCore. But it started to feel like death by 1,000 cuts, $100 here, $200 there. Every week brought a new emergency that only David could solve. One night, after Sarah called about needing money for Tommy's new winter clothes, I decided it was time for a conversation. I waited until David and I were doing the dishes together, our nightly routine. "Hun," I started, carefully choosing my words, "can we talk about something?" He looked at me, soap suds up to his elbows. "Sure, what's up?" "It's about the money, for your family." I saw his shoulders tense slightly. "Don't you think it's becoming a bit excessive?" David's face flushed with embarrassment as he dried his hands. I know. I'm just used to helping them out. I've been doing it since I got my first job." "But your mom has a good pension," I pointed out gently. "And Sarah has Mike, shouldn't he be providing for his own family?" David let out a long sigh and leaned against the counter. "Mike, well, he hasn't actually worked in over a year." "What?" I nearly dropped the plate I was drying. "Why not?" "He keeps quitting. Every job he gets, there's always something wrong. The work is too hard, the boss is unreasonable, the commute is too long." David ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. "There's always an excuse." I set down the dish towel and turned to face my husband. "David, I love how much you care about your family. But we need to think about our future too. We want to buy a house someday, right? Have our own children?" "Of course," he nodded. "Then we need to start prioritizing our own family," I said softly, taking his hand. "Supporting your mom and sister is kind, but we can't keep doing it at the expense of our own dreams." David was quiet for a long moment, absently playing with my fingers. Finally, he looked up. "You're right. We should be saving for our future. What if we set up a separate savings account specifically for the house? We can put a fixed amount in there every month, no touching it for any reason." "That sounds perfect," I smiled, relieved he understood. We spent the rest of the evening planning our savings strategy, and for the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were truly on the same page about our future. 2 months into our new savings plan, Linda invited us over for Sunday dinner. I had a nagging feeling about it, but David insisted we should go. "They're still family," he said, squeezing my hand as we drove over. The tension was palpable from the moment we walked in. Sarah was setting the table, her movements sharp and angry. Mike was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Linda's smile seemed forced as she hugged David, barely acknowledging my presence. The first 20 minutes of dinner were filled with awkward small talk about the weather and Linda's garden. I pushed my meatloaf around the plate, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. "David, honey," Linda began, her voice dripping with sweetness, "I noticed you haven't sent any money for the past 2 months. Is everything okay at work?" The clinking of forks against plates stopped. I could feel everyone's eyes on us. David cleared his throat, and I saw him straighten his shoulders, something he always did when he was nervous. "Actually, Mom," he said, his voice steady but quiet, "Rose and I are saving up to buy a house. We want to start our own family soon." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down, her eyes boring into me. Sarah's face turned red, and I could see the storm brewing. A house? Sarah's voice cracked. While I'm here pregnant with my second child, barely able to afford prenatal vitamins? Do you know how expensive baby things are these days? I felt my blood begin to boil. 2 months of biting my tongue, and I couldn't hold back anymore. Maybe your husband should think about that, I said, nodding toward Mike, who was still somehow managing to check his phone under the table. Sarah's face crumpled. How dare you? You're so cruel. The tears started flowing, right on cue. You don't understand our situation. Mike finally looked up from his phone. Hey, I'm trying here. Do you know how hard it is to find a good job in this economy? I'm dealing with depression, you know. Something in me snapped. Depression didn't stop you from having another baby, did it? The room exploded. Sarah wailed louder. Mike started defending himself about his job search, but Linda's voice rose above them all. You, she pointed her finger at me, face contorted with rage. You're trying to turn my son against his own family. We were happy before you came along with your selfish ideas. Selfish? I stood up so quickly, my chair scraped against the floor. Wanting to build a future with my husband is selfish? Mom, stop, David tried to interrupt, but Linda was on a roll. She's poisoning your mind against us. Your own mother and sister. How dare she tell us we can't have help from our own family? I couldn't take any more. Without a word, I grabbed my purse and walked out. David followed close behind, and we got into the car in silence. The sound of Linda's shout still echoed from the house as we pulled away. The drive home was painfully quiet. I watched the streetlights flash by, fighting back tears of frustration. Finally, as we pulled into our apartment complex, David spoke. You were right, he said softly. About everything. But maybe we need to be more gentle with them. They're not going to change overnight. I turned to look at him, saw the conflict written all over his face. Part of me wanted to argue that his family didn't deserve gentleness, that they needed a reality check. But looking at my husband's pained expression, I just nodded. The aftermath of our dinner confrontation played out in the most modern way possible, on social media. Sarah began posting daily updates that made my blood boil. Struggling to afford prenatal vitamins for my baby. Pregnant and broke, family struggle, one post read. Another showed an empty shopping cart, having to cut back on groceries this month. Sometimes I wonder how we'll manage with another little one on the way. The posts kept coming, each one more dramatic than the last. Pictures of Tommy looking sad beside empty toy store windows, long paragraphs about the importance of family support, pointed comments about some people having their priorities wrong. I caught David checking his phone constantly, his face getting more strained with each notification. One evening, after he'd been particularly quiet, I found him staring at a photo Sarah had posted of Tommy's worn-out shoes. You can send her something, I said softly, touching his shoulder. Small amounts. Just, let's keep our savings plan intact. The relief on his face was immediate. So David started sending Sarah a modest monthly amount again. Like magic, the tragic social media posts decreased, though they never completely stopped. Linda began extending dinner invitations once more, though the atmosphere was far from warm. Would you like more potatoes, David? Linda would ask warmly, then slide her eyes past me as if I were invisible. Sarah would only address her brother, speaking about me in the third person even when I sat right there. I wonder if your wife would mind passing the salt, she'd say, staring at the ceiling. I took it all in stride. Because while they were busy giving me the cold shoulder, something amazing was happening at work. TechCore landed a massive contract with Global Tech, one of the biggest names in the industry. David and I had both been instrumental in securing the deal, and our compensation reflected that. Suddenly, our combined income nearly doubled. Our savings account grew faster than we'd ever dreamed possible. We kept living modestly, but allowed ourselves a few luxuries, a new hybrid SUV to replace David's struggling sedan, a weekend trip to the coast here and there. As our bank account grew, so did our dreams. We started looking at real estate listings, discussing neighborhoods, planning for our future. For the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were truly moving forward. It was during one of our now tense family dinners that Linda dropped her latest bomb. I was quietly eating my pot roast, trying to ignore the usual cold shoulders, when she cleared her throat dramatically. "I saw your vacation photos on Facebook," she announced, fixing me with an icy stare. "Palm Springs, wasn't it? That resort looked expensive." I felt David tense beside me. Here we go again, I thought. "Those infinity pools, luxury spa treatments," Linda continued, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Really, David, I don't think it's appropriate to flaunt such a luxurious lifestyle when your sister can barely make ends meet with 2 children." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. As she spoke, the clicking of computer keys provided a steady background rhythm. Mike sat at the desk in the corner, completely absorbed in his newest video game, the 3rd new release he'd bought this month, by my count. I couldn't help myself. "Speaking of making ends meet," I said, gesturing toward Mike, "there are plenty of job openings in tech support at our company. The pay is good, and the benefits are excellent." The clicking stopped for a moment, then resumed even louder. Sarah's face turned that familiar shade of red. "You have no idea what it's like," she snapped. "Try being a mother of 2 before you judge us." "Oh wait, you wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The barb stung, but I kept my face neutral. Mike continued playing his game, apparently oblivious to the tension in the room. Or maybe he just didn't care. I could have pointed out that being a mother was Sarah's choice, just like having a second child while unemployed was their choice. I could have mentioned that the cost of Mike's gaming habit could probably cover those prenatal vitamins she was always complaining about on Facebook. I could have started another fight. Instead, I just shook my head and took another bite of pot roast. Later that night, as David and I drove home, I thought about the monthly transfers he still made to his sister's account. The amount wasn't small, it could have furnished an entire room in our future house, but our new salaries meant we could handle it without derailing our plans. Sometimes keeping the peace came with a price tag, and for now, we could afford it. Meanwhile, Sarah's demands evolved from subtle hints to full-blown gift registries. Every holiday, Christmas, Easter, birthdays, Mother's Day, yes, she expected gifts from her brother for Mother's Day, came with a detailed list of expensive items she needed for herself and the kids. "David, look at this," I said one evening, showing him the latest email from his sister. It was a Christmas list that included designer clothes, the latest iPad, and premium toys that cost more than our monthly car payment. David sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I'll talk to her. This is getting ridiculous." But when he called Sarah to explain that he was already helping with monthly support, the waterworks started immediately. I could hear her shrill voice through the phone, "I'll tell Mom. You care more about your wife's feelings than your own family's needs." After watching David struggle through 3 such conversations, I'd had enough. While he was in the shower one evening, I opened Sarah's latest gift requirements email and started editing. The $800 designer purse became a $400 alternative. The $1,000 iPad became a $500 tablet. Every item, cut exactly in half. "Here," I said, showing David my revised list. "This is what we're doing." He looked uncertain. "Sarah won't be happy." "Sarah's never happy," I pointed out. "But this is still generous." When the gifts were delivered, the reaction was exactly what I expected. Sarah called David in tears, and Linda left a scathing voicemail about cheap knockoffs. At the next family dinner, they both shot daggers at me with their eyes. "I just don't understand why you couldn't get the items I specifically requested," Sarah sniffed. I gave her my sweetest smile. "Oh, but didn't you know? It's not about the price tag, it's the thought that counts. We put a lot of thought into choosing these alternatives." The look she gave me could have curdled milk. A year passed in this strange dance of passive-aggressive gift-giving and tense family dinners. Then came the Easter gathering that would change everything. Sarah waited until everyone was seated at the table, then stood up with what she clearly thought was a radiant expression. "I have wonderful news," she announced. "We're expecting baby number 3. The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I felt David stiffen beside me. A 3rd child? With no income? No home of their own? My mind spun with calculations of how much more this would add to our monthly family support payments. Mike, predictably, didn't look up from his phone. Linda, however, was ecstatic. "Oh, my darling," she cried, hugging Sarah. "This is wonderful news. 3 beautiful grandchildren." Then she turned to me, her eyes glittering with malice. "You should take notes, Rose. Sarah's such a wonderful example of a real woman. Here she is, about to have her 3rd child, while you still haven't given David any." The room went quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. I set down my fork carefully, making sure my voice was steady when I spoke. "I believe in doing things in the right order," I said coolly. "First, build a stable foundation, like having our own home and being able to provide for our children without depending on handouts. Then, start a family." Linda and Sarah exchanged looks, before breaking into artificial laughter. "Oh, Rose," Linda said condescendingly, "you're so corporate. Family isn't about money and houses." "No," I agreed, taking a sip of water. "It's about responsibility." The tension around the table was thick enough to cut with a knife, but I didn't care anymore. Let them laugh. Let them think I was cold and calculating. At least my future children would have a roof over their heads that nobody could take away. Sarah's 3rd baby arrived in September, another boy. Meanwhile, David and I had reached our savings goal. After months of house hunting, we finally found it, our perfect home. A beautiful 2-story colonial with 4 bedrooms, a spacious backyard, and a kitchen that made me want to learn to cook properly. It was in an excellent school district, just a 20-minute drive from work. We spent weeks planning renovations, picking paint colors, and choosing furniture. Every room held a promise: the sunny bedroom that would make a perfect nursery, the basement we could turn into a playroom, the office space where we could work from home when needed. Then came the dinner invitation from Linda. "Mom wants us to come over tonight," David said, checking his phone. "She says it's important." Something felt off about the invitation, but I couldn't put my finger on what. When we arrived, everyone was there: Linda, Sarah, Mike, and all 3 kids. They had this strange, almost smug energy about them. Sarah was practically bouncing in her seat, while Linda wore the self-satisfied smile I'd learned to dread. "So," Linda began after we'd settled in, "I hear congratulations are in order. You bought a house?" I nodded, still riding the high of our achievement. "Yes, we just closed last week. It's perfect for..." "Well," Linda cut me off, "that's actually what we wanted to discuss." She folded her hands on the table, like a business executive about to close a deal. "You and David are still young, no children yet. You can continue living in your apartment just fine." I felt my smile freeze. What was she getting at? "But Sarah, my poor girl, has 3 beautiful children, cramped up in this house. They need space to grow, a yard to play in." Linda's voice dripped with false concern. "So, we've decided that you should give your new house to Sarah and her family." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. But Linda's face remained serious. Sarah was nodding enthusiastically, while Mike finally looked up from his phone, showing interest for the first time in months. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, looking between them. "You want us to give away our house? The house we spent years saving for?" Sarah leaned forward. "I'm a mother of 3, she said, as if that explained everything. "I have a right to provide my children with proper living conditions. You can always buy another house later." I turned to David, my heart pounding. "Are you hearing this? Do you finally see how entitled they are? But before David could respond, Linda's smile widened. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "I raised my son right. He knows where his loyalties lie, with his mother and sister. Isn't that right, David?" Bang! David's fist came down on the table so hard the dishes rattled. He shot up from his chair, his face flushed with anger I'd never seen before. Linda and Sarah actually flinched, their smug expressions dissolving into shock. "That's enough," David's voice boomed through the room. Even Mike dropped his phone. "I have sat here for years watching you manipulate and guilt me. I've supported you financially, emotionally, constantly. I've given you money while you," he pointed at Mike, "sit around playing video games all day. I've listened to you insult my wife, belittle our choices, and demand more and more." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but David cut her off. "No, you don't get to talk right now. Do you have any idea how much money I've given you over the years? Thousands upon thousands of dollars. And now you have the audacity to demand our house?" Linda tried to interject. "David, sweetie. Don't sweetie me, Mom. You think you raised me right? Teaching me that it's okay to leech off relatives? That it's acceptable to demand they give up their home?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what? You actually did raise me right enough to finally see how toxic this all is." He grabbed my hand, pulling me up from my chair. "We're done. All of this? It's over. No more money, no more gifts, no more manipulation. Find someone else to be your ATM." "But the children," Sarah started crying. "Should be your and Mike's responsibility," David shouted. "Not mine, not Rose's. Yours." Still holding my hand, he pulled me toward the door. "Don't call us. Don't text us. Don't send us your lists of demands. We're done." The last thing I saw as we left was their stunned faces, frozen in disbelief. David practically ran to the car, helping me in before jumping into the driver's seat. As we pulled away from the curb, I couldn't help myself. I grabbed his face and kissed him hard. "I love you," I whispered against his lips. "I'm so proud of you." He hugged me tight, and I felt him trembling slightly. "I should have done that years ago. I'm sorry it took me so long to stand up to them." The next few weeks were a hurricane of desperate attempts at contact. Linda called constantly, alternating between tears and threats. Sarah sent lengthy texts about how we were destroying her family. Flying monkeys, in the form of distant relatives, called to tell us how cruel we were being. But David stood firm. He blocked their numbers, unfriended them on social media, and we focused on making our new house a home. We painted walls, bought furniture, and started planting a garden. Each day that passed, I watched the weight of his family's manipulation lift from his shoulders. One morning, as we sat in our beautiful kitchen, drinking coffee and planning to convert one of the bedrooms into a nursery, David reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For helping me find my spine. For showing me what real family should be like. For being patient while I figured it all out." As I write this, sitting in our cozy living room, I can't help but smile. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you deserve. Sometimes you have to build your own. And that's exactly what we're doing, one day, one room, one dream at a time. The nursery paint samples are spread out on the coffee table in front of me, and tomorrow we have our first appointment with the fertility specialist. Life isn't perfect, but it's ours. And that's all that matters. The earliest memory I have of my mother is the scent of her lavender perfume. I was 4 years old when she died, but that fragrance still haunts me, especially on quiet nights when I'm alone in my room, trying to piece together the fragments of our brief time together. My name is Chloe, and this is the story of how I lost 2 families and found myself. I don't remember much from the weeks after Mom died. Most of my time was spent at my grandparents' house, a cozy 2-story home that would later play a crucial role in my life. Grandma Martha and Grandpa Joe tried their best to shield me from the pain, keeping me occupied with cookies and stories while Dad handled the funeral arrangements. 1 year passed in a blur of transitions between Dad's house and my grandparents. I didn't realize it then, but looking back, I can see how Dad was gradually pulling away, spending less time with me and more time elsewhere. I'd hear snippets of adult worry, words like too soon and moving on, but I was too young to understand their significance. I was 5 when Dad brought home the news that would change everything. I remember sitting on our worn living room couch, my small legs barely reaching the edge, when he walked in with a woman I'd seen a few times before. She had long brown hair and a kind smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Chloe, honey," Dad said, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that even my young mind detected, "this is Linda. We got married last weekend, and she's going to be your new mom." I stared at Linda's stomach, which showed a noticeable bump under her flowered dress. Dad followed my gaze and added, "And you're going to have a baby sister soon. Isn't that exciting?" The word exciting hung in the air like a lead balloon. Linda stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "I know this is a lot to take in, Chloe. But I promise we'll make it work." I remember nodding, not because I agreed, but because it seemed like the thing to do. I retreated to my room that night and pulled out the only photo I had of my mom showing her holding me as a baby, both of us laughing at something off camera. I touched her face gently, trying to remember the sound of her laugh. It was strange watching Dad transform into a different person. The man who used to spend weekends taking me to the park now spent his time painting the nursery and attending birthing classes with Linda. I tried not to mind, really, I did. After all, Linda wasn't unkind to me. She'd drive me to school in her blue Honda, ask about my day, and make sure I had everything I needed. But there was always something temporary about her attention, like she was babysitting rather than parenting. I'd catch her absent-mindedly rubbing her growing belly while I told her about my day at school, her eyes glazed with thoughts of her own baby. "Linda, can we get ice cream?" I asked one afternoon after school. "Not today, sweetie. I need to rest, the baby's been kicking all day," she replied, heading straight for the couch. It became a common response, "Not today, maybe later, another time." Then Emma arrived. I remember the day Dad brought them home from the hospital. He was carrying this tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket, his face glowing with a pride I'd never seen before, not even in the photos of him holding me as a baby. "Chloe, meet your baby sister, Emma," he announced, his voice soft with wonder. I stood on my tiptoes to peek at the red-faced infant. "Hi, Emma," I whispered, trying to sound like the responsible big sister I was supposed to be. That's when everything changed. Suddenly, there were new rules in the house, all revolving around Emma. "Chloe, please don't run in the house, Emma's sleeping." "Chloe, can you help fold these clothes while I feed Emma?" "Not so loud, honey. You'll upset your sister." I became a shadow in my own home, tiptoeing around, trying to make myself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. My responsibilities grew while my privileges shrank. I learned to clean bottles, fold tiny clothes, and tidy up toys that weren't mine. One day, I came home from school to find Dad and Linda cooing over Emma, who was playing with a brand new tablet designed for babies. "Look how smart she is," Linda exclaimed as Emma randomly hit the screen. "She's going to be a genius." I glanced down at my worn-out sneakers, remembering how Dad had said we couldn't afford new ones this month. But here was Emma, barely able to walk, with the latest educational gadgets scattered around her. The pattern continued. Emma got designer clothes from the mall, while I got hand-me-downs from our cousins. She had a room full of the latest toys while I still treasured the stuffed bear my mom had given me, now missing an eye and patched in several places. It wasn't that they were cruel. They remembered to feed me, clothe me, send me to school. But it was always an afterthought, like checking off a box on a to-do list. The only time they seemed to really notice me was when Grandma and Grandpa visited. "Chloe needs new clothes," Grandma would point out, and suddenly Dad would remember to take me shopping. "Don't you think Chloe might like that new book series all the kids are reading?" Grandpa would suggest, and magically, the books would appear. I tried to be understanding. I really did. I kept my room clean, did my homework without being asked, and helped with Emma whenever they needed me. I thought if I was good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, they'd remember I was their daughter too. When Emma started walking and talking, I thought things would get better. I imagined us becoming best friends, sharing secrets, and playing together like the sisters I saw on TV. I even decorated half of my room with welcome signs the day she was old enough to string full sentences together. "Want to play dolls with me, Emma?" I asked hopefully one afternoon. She looked at me with those calculating eyes that seemed too old for her 4-year-old face. "No, I want your dollhouse." "But that's mine. Grandma gave it to me for Christmas," I protested. Emma's response was to march straight to Dad and Linda, her face scrunching up in that familiar way that meant trouble for me. "Daddy, Chloe won't share her toys with me," she wailed, tears appearing on command. "Chloe," Dad's voice boomed from the kitchen. "Stop being selfish and let your sister play with your toys." That was just the beginning. Soon, Emma figured out she could take anything of mine she wanted. My art supplies, my books, even my clothes, nothing was off limits. When I tried to get them back, it always ended the same way. "Mom, Chloe's being mean again." "John, tell your daughter to stop bothering Emma." But the toy snatching was just the warm-up. Emma developed a talent for setting traps that would get me in trouble. Like the time she deliberately spilled juice on her new dress and told our parents I'd pushed her. Or when she broke her tablet and claimed I'd done it out of jealousy. Each time, I'd try to defend myself. "That's not what happened. She's lying." And each time, Dad would shake his head disapprovingly. "Stop trying to get attention, Chloe. Go to your room." My only refuge was at my grandparents' house. They saw through Emma's act and weren't afraid to say so. "John," Grandpa would say to Dad during Sunday dinners, his voice firm but tired, "you need to treat your daughters equally." "We do treat them equally," Linda would snap back. "But Chloe is just difficult. Always causing problems, always fighting with Emma. While Emma is such a sweet, well-behaved child." I'd sit there, pushing food around my plate, as Grandma's voice would rise. "Open your eyes. That sweet child of yours is manipulating everyone in this house. You're raising a little con artist, and you can't even see it." "Mother, please," Dad would try to intervene. "You're being unfair to Emma." "Unfair?" Grandpa would scoff. "What's unfair is watching you two spoil one child rotten while treating the other like she's invisible. That's what's unfair." But it was like talking to a wall. Dad and Linda had their narrative about their perfect younger daughter and their problematic older one, and nothing could shake it, not even the truth staring them in the face. Senior year should have been exciting, full of dreams about college and future plans. Instead, I found myself constantly worried about whether I'd even get to go. One night, as I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water, I heard whispers that made me stop in my tracks. "John, it doesn't make sense." Linda's voice was hushed but intense. "The tuition money for Chloe, we could use it for Emma instead. Get her into that private high school she wants, and later, a better college." My heart stopped. They were talking about my college fund, the money Mom and Dad had started saving before I was even born. "I can't," Dad replied, his voice weak. "I promised Sarah. I promised her I'd make sure Chloe got an education." "Sarah's been dead for 14 years. Linda's whisper turned sharp. "You can't let promises to a dead woman control our lives forever. Emma deserves the best education we can give her." There was a long pause before Dad spoke again. "My parents would disinherit me if I did that. You know how they are about Chloe." My legs felt weak. So that was it. The only reason Dad was keeping his promise to Mom was fear of losing his inheritance. Not love for me, not respect for Mom's memory, just money. "Fine," Linda spat. "But I think it's ridiculous we're spending so much on her when Emma could use it better." I slipped back to my room without the water, my throat too tight to swallow anyway. Graduation came and went. I got accepted to the local college's graphic design program, which meant I could live at home and save money. Grandma and Grandpa surprised me with a top-of-the-line laptop at my graduation party. "This is for all those A's you earned, sweetheart," Grandpa said, hugging me tight. "You'll need it for your design work." I was over the moon. Finally, I had professional-grade equipment for my studies. But my excitement was tempered by transportation concerns. The campus was across town, and I hoped Dad might let me use his old Honda now that he had a new car. "Dad?" I approached him one evening. "About getting to college." "We can't afford another car, Chloe," he cut me off before I could finish. "The tuition payments are already stretching us thin. You'll have to take the bus." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. But just 2 days later, I overheard them in the living room. "I think the red Mercedes would be perfect for Emma's Sweet 16, Linda was saying. "She'll be learning to drive soon, and it's such a safe car for a new driver." "Isn't it a bit expensive?" Dad asked, but I could hear the smile in his voice. "Only the best for our little princess," Linda replied. "We can start saving now, she'll be 16 before we know it." I stood there, my bus pass clutched in my hand, thinking about the hour-long commute I'd be making each way while they planned to buy my 14-year-old sister a luxury car. 2 years into college, life had fallen into a predictable routine of classes, bus rides, and trying to stay invisible at home. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Chloe?" Grandma's voice sounded strained. "Could you come visit us this weekend? Your grandfather's had a bit of trouble with his heart, and we need to talk to you about something important." That Saturday, I found myself sitting in their familiar living room, the same place where I'd found refuge so many times during my childhood. Grandpa looked pale, but was sitting up in his armchair, Grandma perched on the armrest beside him. They exchanged a look I couldn't quite read, then Grandma took a deep breath. "Chloe, dear, we need to tell you something. After your grandfather's heart attack, we've done a lot of thinking about the future. We're getting old, sweetheart," Grandpa continued. "And maintaining this house is becoming too much for us. We've decided to move to Pine Grove Nursing Home." The tears came before I could stop them. But. Now, Grandma moved to sit beside me, pulling me into a hug that smelled of her signature lavender perfume, so similar to Mom's. "We'll have excellent care there. And you can visit anytime you want. I'll come every weekend," I promised through my tears. They both laughed, the sound warming the room. "You most certainly will not," Grandpa declared. "You're young. You should be out with friends, living your life, maybe meeting a nice boy." Then their faces grew serious again. Grandpa leaned forward in his chair. "There's something else we need to tell you. We've spent about half our savings on securing our place at Pine Grove. The rest will go to the family after we're gone." I started to protest that I didn't want to talk about this, but he held up his hand. "But the house," he continued, "we've already taken care of that. We've registered it in your name, Chloe. This house belongs to you now. It's all legal and official." My head spun. "Does Dad know?" Grandpa's face hardened slightly. "It's none of his business. This was our house to give, and we chose to give it to you." "But," I looked around at the familiar walls, the photos spanning generations, the corner where I used to hide during hide and seek. "Why?" "Because we're not blind," Grandma said softly. "And we want to make sure you're taken care of." I sat there, stunned, looking at these two people who had always been my strongest supporters, who had seen me when everyone else looked past me. "I won't tell them," I whispered, understanding instinctively that this needed to stay secret for now. Grandpa nodded approvingly. "Good girl. What's done is done, and it's no one's business but ours." 2 weeks passed in a blur of helping Grandma and Grandpa move to Pine Grove. The day they handed Dad the keys to their house, I felt my stomach twist. He had no idea those keys weren't really his to take. "This is wonderful," Linda gushed, already planning renovations in her head. "No more rent." We can finally have a real family home. They wasted no time moving us in. I watched silently as Linda walked through each room, her nose wrinkling at the vintage furniture and familiar decorations that held so many of my childhood memories. "This place needs a complete overhaul," she declared, running a finger along Grandma's antique sideboard. "And a deep clean. For now, the girls can share the blue room upstairs, it's the only one properly habitable." My heart sank. Share a room with Emma? At 16, she'd become even more impossible than before. As if on cue, Emma's shrill voice filled the house. "I am not sharing a room with her," she screamed, stamping her foot on Grandma's hardwood floors. "This isn't fair. I deserve the master bedroom. Why should I be stuck with her? Make her sleep in the closet or the basement or whatever. I don't care." I stood there, clutching a box of my belongings, as Emma's tantrum escalated. The familiar headache that came with her screaming started to pulse behind my eyes. "I hate this. I hate this house. I hate having to share anything with her." I'd learned long ago that there was no point in arguing. Without a word, I carried my box upstairs to the blue room, the same room where I used to sleep during weekend visits with Grandma and Grandpa. I set my laptop on the old desk by the window, placed a few books beside it, and left for my afternoon classes. The whole bus ride to campus, I tried to focus on my upcoming design project, but Emma's words kept echoing in my head. She'd gotten worse over the years, if that was possible. More entitled, more cruel, more calculating. When I returned that evening, the house was quiet. Dad and Linda's voices drifted up from the kitchen, but there was no sign of Emma. I climbed the stairs to our shared room, my footsteps silent on the carpet runner Grandma had installed years ago. The moment I opened the door, my world stopped. My laptop, my beautiful graduation gift from Grandma and Grandpa, my lifeline for my design work, lay shattered on the floor. The screen was cracked beyond repair, the case bent and broken. Emma sat on her bed, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips as she watched my face crumple. "What did you do?" My voice came out as a whisper, then rose to a shout. "What did you do?" "Oops," she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Accidents happen. But go ahead, try telling them. We both know who they'll believe." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I did it on purpose, and there's nothing you can do about it." Something inside me snapped. All the years of being pushed aside, ignored, gaslight, it all came rushing up like a tidal wave. Before I knew what I was doing, I lunged at Emma, my vision blurred with tears of rage. "You spoiled, entitled little brat," I screamed, grabbing her shoulders. She shrieked, not her usual calculated cry for attention, but a genuine sound of surprise. We tumbled onto the floor, years of pent-up frustration finally exploding. "Help! She's crazy! Help!" Emma screamed, while I kept shouting about all the times she'd destroyed my things, lied about me, made my life miserable. Dad and Linda burst into the room, Dad pulling me off Emma, while Linda rushed to cradle her precious daughter. "Look!" I pointed at my shattered laptop, my voice breaking. "Look what she did. Grandma and Grandpa's graduation gift, she destroyed it on purpose." She admitted it. Emma's face transformed instantly, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched Linda. "It was an accident. I just bumped into the desk, I didn't mean to." And then she attacked me like a wild animal. "You evil, horrible girl." Linda shrieked at me, her face contorted with rage. "How dare you attack my daughter? John, I want her out of this house. Now. She's dangerous." I turned to Dad, desperately hoping he'd finally see through Emma's act. But his face was hard, closed off. "Pack your things," he said coldly. "And get out." The words hit me like physical blows. "Why?" I whispered, then found my voice. "Why do you always choose them? What happened to the dad who used to love me? Who promised Mom he'd take care of me?" His face reddened with anger. "Don't you dare bring your mother into this. You want to know the truth? You've been nothing but a burden since she died. A constant reminder of a past I wanted to forget. Linda and Emma are my real family now. You're just excess baggage we've been carrying around. You have 1 hour to leave my house." As he turned to leave, Emma's smug voice piped up. "I can finally have this room all to myself. I'm thinking pink walls, maybe a crystal chandelier." Linda joined in, already planning the renovation. "We'll get you new furniture, sweetheart. Make the space truly yours." Something shifted inside me at that moment. A lifetime of being pushed aside, of swallowing my words, of trying to be smaller, it all fell away. I stood up straighter, my voice clear and strong. "Actually, this isn't your house to renovate." They all turned to stare at me. "What are you talking about?" Linda snapped. With steady hands, I reached into my purse and pulled out the property documents Grandpa had given me. "This house belongs to me. Grandma and Grandpa transferred ownership to me before they moved to Pine Grove. If anyone's leaving, it's you three." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad snatched the papers from my hands, his face growing pale as he read. This can't be legal," Linda stuttered. "John, call your father right now." Dad's hand shook as he dialed Grandpa's number, putting it on speaker. "Dad, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Grandpa's voice was calm, almost amused. "I see Chloe's finally told you about the house." "How could you do this to us?" Dad's voice cracked. "How could we do this?" Grandpa's voice turned hard. "How could you do what you've done to Chloe all these years? We watched you turn from a loving father into a spineless man who lets his wife and spoiled daughter walk all over him and abuse your firstborn child. Yes, we gave the house to Chloe. We knew this day would come, when you'd finally show your true colors." Dad started to respond with something angry, but Grandpa cut him off. "Choose your next words very carefully, son. One more disrespectful word, and you and your precious Emma lose your inheritance too. Your choice." I looked at the three shocked faces before me, my father, Linda, and Emma. They'd gone from righteous anger to stunned silence in the span of minutes. Now Linda was backpedaling fast. "Chloe, sweetie, we were just upset about the fight. We didn't really mean any of it. Of course we don't want you to leave. We were just joking." Her voice had that sickly sweet tone she used when trying to manipulate situations. "I have a really bad sense of humor," I replied, my voice steady. "So I'm going to take everything you said at face value. You have 1 week to find a new place and move out. I'll be staying at a hostel this week while you pack. I don't trust myself to be around any of you right now." "Chloe, please," Dad started, but I cut him off. 1 week. After that, I'm changing the locks." I walked out of my grandparents' house, no, my house, that night with my head held high, even as tears streamed down my face. The hostel bed was uncomfortable, but it was better than staying under the same roof with people who'd just shown me exactly who they were. True to my word, they were out within the week. On moving day, they made one last attempt at reconciliation. "We're so sorry," Dad said, standing in the doorway with the last box. "We realize now how horrible we've been." Linda nodded frantically. "We never meant for things to go this far." Even Emma managed to look somewhat contrite, though she said nothing. I stood silently, watching them leave. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. 3 months later, I sat in Grandpa and Grandma's room at Pine Grove, telling them everything that had happened since moving day. The afternoon sun streamed through the window as Grandma poured tea into delicate cups. She'd insisted on bringing her good china to the nursing home. "You did the right thing, standing up for yourself," Grandpa said, but his eyes were sad. "Though I hope someday you can all find a way to be family again." Grandma reached over and squeezed my hand. "But only when you're ready, dear. And only if they've truly changed." I nodded, telling them about my decision to rent out the house while I finished college. The rental income helped cover my expenses, and I'd found a small apartment closer to campus. I'd even been able to replace my laptop with the first month's rent. "Dad called yesterday," I said quietly, stirring my tea. "They're living in some rundown apartment complex on the edge of town. He apologized again, said they're struggling. And how do you feel about that? Grandma asked gently. Honestly? Part of me feels guilty, but another part thinks they needed to experience consequences for once. I set my cup down. I told him I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive them, or if I even want to try. That's fair, Grandpa said. Some wounds take a long time to heal. I'm graduating next semester with my degree in graphic design. I've already had some promising interviews with local agencies, and my portfolio is getting stronger every day. Sometimes I drive by the house and see the young family who's renting it now, their kids playing in the yard, lights glowing warmly in the windows at dusk. Maybe someday I'll move back in. Maybe someday I'll even be ready to have a relationship with Dad, Linda, and Emma again. But for now, I'm focused on building my own life, one where I don't have to make myself smaller to make room for anyone else.